All right. Hey, folks, welcome in. Hello, hello.
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 Welcome, folks. Hello, hello. We're getting started here in a couple of minutes. Let some more folks trickle in.
I love that moment of seeing all the attendees numbers go up.
I
This is
know, yeah, it's the best.
it's so great.
Thanks. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Hey, Ebony.
We've got our panelists reconnecting too, which is really fun. Folks, it's 3 o'clock. We'll just go one more minute here and then get started. Welcome. Happy Sunday. Happy holiday weekend. Thanks for joining us for part of it.
Yes, and we have a question. Will we be able to watch the replay? This session is being recorded, so you should be able to have access to that once we are done. So, yeah.
All right. What do you say we get this thing going?
Let's do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Well, welcome, folks. Be the first to welcome you. My name is Luke Mitchner. I'm part of the Educators for Democracy programming team at the Institute for Common Power, joined by Carmen Cruz and Ivory Kennedy, my um, uh, co-programmers on that team. They're going to introduce themselves in a little bit here. I'm a public school teacher in Washington State, and also been working with the Institute for a couple of years now, and thrilled to be with you for our first installment of the Educator um, mini lectures teach-ins for 2025. We ran 4 of these last year and in the previous year, and we're excited to be launching another series again here in 2025. One of our mottos at the Institute, our director, Terry Scott, believes in and preaches all the time is education to action. And on your screen there, we've got a quote from Dr. King that helps us down that path. So we're going to start with that tonight as we started the last couple of these with this from Dr. King. Education without social action is a one-sided value because it has no true power potential. Social action without education is a weak expression of pure energy. Deeds uninformed by educated thought can take false directions. When we go into action and confront our adversaries, we must be as armed with knowledge as they. Our policies should have the strength of deep analysis beneath them to be able to challenge the clever sophistries of our opponents. When we go into action and confront our adversaries, we must be as armed with knowledge as they. And we think even more so. And the bringing together of community, of educators who are steeped in knowledge for the histories that they teach, for the methods that they teach, for their passion projects, are some of the best places we can go for that knowledge. So we're excited to bring you this event today with 5 phenomenal educators, which we'll tell you more about coming up here in just a second. All right, why don't I pass this off? I don't have my document open. I forget. Oh, Ivory, I'm
Oh,
kicking
you're
it over
good.
to you.
You're
It's all
good.
yours.
Yes, so this iteration of our teaching is brought to you by the Institute for Common Power. Common Power is our larger organization which mobilizes voters and helps create voting justice across the nation. So some of you may have been on different trips or you've door knocked, and some of you may have registered and are interested, and some of you will do that. So again, trying to make sure we foster more of an inclusive democracy. The Institute for Common Power is the educational arm of Common Power. We are dedicated to and challenging the systems. And right now, more than ever, we need people who are dedicated to challenging those systems of injustice through expansive, strategic, and experimental programming, where we offer lectures, workshops, conferences, truth and purpose learning tours, which some of you have either been on or might be interested in. Just to give you a brief overview, so we've had nearly 20 learning tours thus far with more than 500 participants. 5 educator learning tours, and then more than 130 educators impacting thousands of students. So these are just some of the many pictures of the various tours that we have given. They are very impactful, very life-changing, and the information that you get, especially from the primary sources that still exist, learning from the places where history happened changes the game. So if you are apprehensive or on the fence, we invite you to cross on over and join us on one of those tours if you can. And then I will pass this to Carmen.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Carmen Cruz. I'm a special education teacher at in Brooklyn, New York. And so here's another way that we, the team, have come together to take action. We host a banned book club. Our next cycle begins on March 3rd. If you're interested in joining, we can put the link in the chat. The book that we're going to be reading for March 3rd is Stamped. We highly encourage everyone to sign up, even if you feel like you can't engage the entire time that we've allotted, the hour and a half. If you can come for a little bit and have some conversation, there's also no pressure to read the entire book. We know that we all lead busy lives, but part of taking action is pushing ourselves a little bit further. And one of the ways we're doing that is combating a lot of the atrocities happening in this country, one of them being banning of books. And so the first one is Stamped, so we highly encourage that you join us for that one, and I'll throw it into the chat. And then we also have so many more events to come for this year, for 2025. If you look at our democracy curriculum, we have a lot of events scheduled for every month because we want to make sure that we're engaging the community in the work that has to be done. It doesn't stop, we don't stop, and we are a community together. So if you want to see so many more of those lectures that we've talked about, definitely go on our website and look at the democracy curriculum. And I will also throw that into the chat for you all. All right, yeah, and we're your Educators for Democracy team. So let's just, I think, jump right in to our speakers because I'm really excited to introduce them. Unless Ivory or Luke, you had something you wanted to add.
I think there might be one more slide for Ivory.
Oh, there is. Oh, yes, there is. I'm so sorry.
Yes. No,
that's
you're
all
good. You're good. I'm excited too, so no worries. This is a little project that was put together. This captures all of the educators and the impact across the nation, including Canada, that you see. So if you were to go to our website and click on the Educator Ambassador map, you would see this. Now, this is just a screenshot. As you can see, some of the icons are pulsating. Those that are kind of that goldish orange color, those are actually profiles of people who have gone on the learning tours, educators that have gone on learning tours. And there's a little bit about each of them. So there's a bio for those that chose to put those. You can kind of get a glimpse of who you see. And as well as any other extracurricular things that some educators might be involved with. So as you can see, Washington is a pretty well-represented area, and so is Maryland and that New York area. But you can see the impact that our learning tours are having across this nation, right? So just to pose this question to everybody, right? Think about the amount of truth from going on a learning tour that is offered, that is being shared across the United States of America, right? So we invite all of you to share as much information as you can and get involved with the Institute. If you haven't told any of your friends or any of your colleagues about the Institute, then bring them along because we truly want to fight for a more just and inclusive democracy because we will only get more diverse and the more truth that we can share across this country, the better off our children will be. So with that being said, I will pass this to introduce some of our speakers.
All right, wonderful. So first up, we have Sarah Adamako Ansa, who is a graduate of the University of Alberta with a bachelor's degree in education. She is a former teacher with the Edmonton Catholic School Division, teaching grades 3 through 6 from 2013 until 2021. She was the division's first equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism consultant in 2023 and provided support to administration, teachers, and students in their journey with this important topic. In 2021, she began her term as the educator in residence at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, supporting human rights education in Canada, but also creating a program titled Pass the Mic, Let's Talk About Racism. Currently, she has left the classroom and is now the manager, education outreach for the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. In addition, Sarah is the co-founder of the Black Teachers Association of Alberta and strives to amplify all voices in schools. Finally, she is the fortunate recipient of both the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal and the Randy Palavoda Award for her efforts in contributing to human rights and diversity in education and leadership. Without further ado, Sarah.
Thanks, Carmen. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. I know that there's some folks from my cohort of this tour that are in the house, so it's great to see you all, and thanks for being here this evening. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to present to you today, and I was really quite nervous and honored that Luke asked me if I would be willing to present this round. And I think it's really cool that I have the opportunity as a Canadian to talk to you about some of the work that I'm doing to support the kids here in the province that I live in, which is Edmonton, or sorry, the city is Edmonton, the province is Alberta. So thank you so much for taking some time to listen this afternoon. This here is the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and it's located in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is on Treaty 1 territory. It's the birthplace of the Métis, and the Red River Valley runs through it. And so we really recognize at the museum that although there is drinkable, potable water that runs through this museum, there are places maybe 10 kilometers down the road that are still under boil advisories and don't have the ability or access to clean drinking water. So it's definitely something that we keep in mind. And this is a place where we really recognize Indigenous ancestry, Indigenous excellence, and think about all of the wonderful things that we are so privileged to have on this land. Personally, as I mentioned earlier, I'm from Edmonton, Alberta, and my ancestry is from Ghana, which is in West Africa. My parents immigrated here in the late 70s to give their eventual children, my siblings and I, a better life. And so on Treaty 6 territory where I reside, I'm really grateful to have the ability to work, live, and play, to benefit from the land and the people on it, and to do my best to help my former students and future educators in their work with equity, diversity, human rights, inclusion, and anti-racism. As mentioned, I am the manager for education outreach at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and that means that I get to support Western Canada in human rights education and what that looks like. And while I was the educator in residence for a 2-year stint at the museum, I created a program called Pass the Mic, Let's Talk About Racism. And I'll get into some of those details briefly, but essentially I wanted to give educators who have never had a racial slur hurled at them or a microaggression said their way, or even had folks that maybe didn't believe what they had to say or take what they say at face value based on how they look. I wanted to give all educators the grace to be able to talk about racism and microaggressions and bias with a little bit of grace and not the feelings, the negative feelings that harbor it. We know that our students are encountering these things often and quickly, and it's happening sometimes faster than we can intercept. Sometimes they are on TikTok scrolling and they'll come across something. They might be on Instagram. I know students of mine when I was a 6th grade teacher who had a whole Discord chat, which I didn't even realize 6th graders could use. So this program was created to give teachers the ability to have these hard conversations. I was so lucky to attend the the learning tour in September. And these are just a few highlights and pictures. Of course, there's so many more, and Ivory on that slide earlier had shown many others. But the ability to connect with educators in a different country, learn about curriculum that isn't curriculum that I'm familiar with, and meet folks that are truly passionate was really quite a highlight of 2024 for me. And as I think back and still into our chat, it's really cool to see all the things that people are still continuing to do to bring truth into the classroom. There's just a few things that I want to talk about this afternoon. I'll tell you about some of our resources. I'll tell you about the program. My email's on my final slide. So in case I run over time, you feel free to email me to connect so that I can help you out with anything that you're looking for in the field of human rights. Um, our website's humanrights.ca, and that QR code will take you there. On the final slide, there's another QR code that will take you to our mailing list so that if you're looking for things like bursaries, heads up on new programs, things that we can do to support you, all of those things are completely free of charge for educators. And so you'll have the ability to connect on that with me. We offer virtual field trip programs, which are free of charge, and it's not a pre-recording, it's a live virtual field trip. So one of our interpreters, who I consider experts, will take you through the museum in real time and talk with your students about an area or an aspect of curriculum that you're looking at. So for example, if you're looking at Indigenous sovereignty, one of our experts will do so using any platform of your choice. In Canada, our official languages are English and French, so we offer all of our field trips in those two languages. However, a lot of our interpreters are multilingual. And so if you are looking and you are at a site that predominantly speaks Spanish or any other language, we have the ability to connect with you and help with that. Some of our programs that we offer are listed there as well. Digital Witness Blanket, Be an Upstander, and Love in a Dangerous Time are three of our flagship programs that help us to discuss what injustice is and how students can use their strengths to support and help their community and help them be better global citizens. The Digital Witness Blanket is all about reconciliation and supporting Indigenous groups and Indigenous folks here on Turtle Island, and what it means to really look at reconciliation. The Digital Witness Blanket does a beautiful job of laying that out for us. And Love in a Dangerous Time is our most recent program that's been created at the museum. It talks all about the LGBT purge, which happened during the Cold War. So there's several different things that if I had all afternoon, I would talk your ear off about, but those are just a few of the things that you can expect to find at humanrights.ca if you take a look. So as mentioned earlier, I had the ability to create this program called Pass the Mic, Let's Talk About Racism. And one of the big reasons that I wanted to talk about racism is because there wasn't anything that really existed. I was lucky enough to be a sixth grade teacher for the final little bit of my teaching career, and I was able to have some really good, candid conversations with my students. And around George Floyd's murder, I had some really tough conversations with my students who predominantly were Black that year. There were 33, sorry, sixth graders in my class. 19 of them were Black boys. And we were all online because of the pandemic. And so my attendance question happened to be, hey, folks, when I call your name, let me know if pineapple belongs on pizza so that I know that you're here. That was my attendance question that day. And I got to the 19th child. His name is Nathan, and he called me out and he said, Miss A, no offense, but this is a stupid question. Someone that looks like my dad died last night at the hands of police. Why are you asking us this? And I didn't know what to say to him. And I figured, as a Black woman myself, if I'm having a hard time answering that question, then my white counterparts, my Asian counterparts, my Indigenous counterparts are probably having an even harder time talking about it. So that kind of sparked for me what the Black Teachers Association has grown into. But further than that, what I could do to support teachers when it comes to talking about these things in the classroom. When I got hired as the educator in residence, I then decided I want to create a program that brings people into the classroom that kids don't necessarily interact with all the time, but might see themselves in. So I'll tell you a little bit about these three amazing Canadians that I had the opportunity to connect with. The first one is Dawn Richardson Wilson, and she's an Olympic athlete for Team Canada. She resides currently in Calgary, Alberta, but lived a long time in Edmonton, and she's actually a dear friend of mine. We connected on a lot of things, but I thought when I interview these folks, I want to be able to have students see traits of themselves in these wonderful people so that they don't feel like they're alone. So in Dawn, of course, a student that is Black and a girl or female presenting will see themselves in her. Um, Dawn, unfortunately, is an orphan. She lost both of her parents quite young. And so knowing that there are some of our children out there that maybe don't have their parents or haven't had their parents or don't have a relationship with their parents might see themselves relating to her in that way. For any student that's an athlete, specifically a winter sport athlete, but any child that loves to be active or has dreams or aspirations to jump into the Olympics or professional sports, they may see themselves in her as well. Dawn is a multilingual individual. She speaks several languages. She's actually studying to be a teacher as well with a minor in ASL. And so students that maybe speak other languages or more than just English and French here in Canada might see themselves reflected in who she is as a person. So that's Dawn. Gurdeep Pandar, I don't know how many of you folks would recognize this individual, but he, over the pandemic, went completely viral online because of all of the dances he was doing and talked a lot about joy and positivity and bringing those into our lives at such a scary time. I thought that for students that might see him themselves reflected in him would would resonate with him because he wears his culture so obviously on his person, which is a wonderful thing. So students that maybe also wear their culture or have symbols of their culture on them might see themselves represented. He's an immigrant from Punjab, but he also is a late in life immigrant. He immigrated in his early 40s, if I'm not mistaken, to Canada. And so for students that immigrated maybe later on or just in general are immigrants to our nations, they might see themselves reflected. He loves winter. And so a lot of our students who enjoy that weather transition, I don't, but some of our kids do, might see themselves in him, which is very basic, very simple, but also very legitimate. For students that like to dance or students that like to entertain, they might see themselves reflected in him. And for students that have aspirations of being a YouTuber or a TikToker, I think it might have been my first year of teaching when you asked that question, what would you like to be when you grow up? And the first time I heard YouTuber, I said, try again. But now I know that there's a career there. And so I wish I could go back, find that student and apologize. But for those that see themselves wanting to be in a viral space like that, they may see themselves reflected in Gurdeep. Finally, the last person I had the pleasure of interviewing is Dimitri Nanakote. Dimitri also goes by Kiara, and Dimitri is a drag performer from Montreal, Quebec. Again, Dimitri is multilingual, so students that speak multiple languages might see themselves reflected there. Dimitri is biracial. Dimitri has a South African father and a French Canadian mother. And so Dimitri is both white and Black. So students that are of mixed race will see themselves reflected in this person. Dimitri uses multiple pronouns. Dimitri is the first person I've ever met to use multiple pronouns. And prior to meeting Dimitri, I was kind of like, tell me how this works. I'm as a cis straight woman, I'm not quite sure how the multiple pronoun thing works. And connecting with Dimitri really opened my eyes as to how someone could identify in multiple ways. And so for students that are maybe queer or questioning, they might see themselves reflected that way. Students that are dancers, performers, singers, actors, they will see themselves represented. And students that maybe feel at some point that their identity is a little bit lost, they might find themselves in this person. I was so lucky to interview all three of them and talk to them for nearly 2 hours some and have some really good conversations about things like microaggressions and racism, sexism, what these things look like and how they've looked like for these folks growing up, but also what they've done to overcome them. And I think that's the piece that's really special. Each person I had the ability to ask them near the end of our interview, what would you tell your 10-year-old self? And for each three of these individuals, their eyes welled up. They got very emotional, knowing that they've come so far that 10-year-old Dawn, Gurdeep, or Dimitri could see themselves doing great things when they got older. It just took a little bit of time and perseverance. Now, as I mentioned earlier, everything that we have at the museum is in both official languages. However, if we need further translation, we're happy to help support you with that. And I'm going to dive into the teacher's guide a little bit to show you some of the things that I thought were super important in the creation of this resource. As I mentioned, I wanted to explore difficult themes, and there's only 7 lessons you'll see. That's because I want the teacher or the educator to take that as little or as much as they'd like. I start off with an author's note. I found in my school division especially that I was often granting permission, if you will, to folks that aren't marginalized to talk about these issues in class. And I would often say it means a lot coming from white educators for Black and Brown students to say, you know what? I heard that racial slur, I'm going to deal with it. Or I heard that microaggression being said, we're going to address it as a class. And so hearing it from other educators is something that I think is really important. And that author's note in the teacher's guide gives you, no, I don't want to say gives you permission, but it offers you a lens into why it's important for us as educators to stand up for these things for our students and give them a voice, or maybe be that voice for them for the first little bit until they find their own. The overview takes you through what the program is all about, gives you information about my 3 wonderful friends and how I got the ability to connect with them. And the before beginning part is where I ask teachers to really stop and reflect. If prior to teaching about racism, you're feeling uncomfortable, unsure, um, nervous, it's good to pump the brakes, and it's good to think about maybe why you're nervous. What is it that needs to be unpacked? Is there something that maybe you don't understand, but need some guidance in? So that before beginning place really causes you to say, here's where I might be needing support as an educator, and giving you resources to find the tools to support that. Then as I mentioned, there are only 7 lessons and they're not linear in any way. And so you could simply say, you know what, my class is really struggling with bias. We're going to take lesson 5. And that might be the only lesson that you use, and that's fine. Um, what have I done? There we go. We're back. So you might only need one of those lessons, and that's totally okay. Um, I do think it's important for teachers to at least, if they're going to use this resource, to at least do lesson number 1, which is creating a safe space. You can't have a difficult conversation. You can't have an honest conversation without having a safe space for your students. And this was written in 2021. In 2025, I would truly change the word safe to brave, because I can't guarantee for my students that 100% of the time the spaces that we're in are completely safe for them, which is a sad reality. But I think there is bravery and vulnerability and the ability for students to, I often model this myself for my students so that they can see that it's okay to speak up. It's okay to acknowledge truth when it happens. It's okay to honor one another and maybe our downfalls or our shortcomings. That's what creating a safe space is all about. And so that is the lesson that I feel is the most important, but that's just me. You might decide that the most important one for you is microaggressions, and so that's the one you take. Um, but I do think it's important to have those conversations in a safe space with our kids. As I mentioned, it's not linear, so you don't have to go in that order. If you chose to do all 7 of those lessons, you could bounce around and do 1, then 6, then 7. It really doesn't matter. It's not like it's not in any sort of order that you need to accomplish or do all of them. There are 2 inquiry-based projects because I've noticed that a lot of teachers are getting away from the paper and pencil tasks, and we're wanting our kids to really be a little bit more malleable and tangible in what they produce and present. And so there are two inquiry-based projects. One is a classroom podcast where it gives students the ability to practice the language that they've learned, talk about experiences in a safe way, and have students connect with one another on some of the things that maybe they didn't know or figure out and learn about the people around them in their classroom. Perhaps one of your students is going through something that other students aren't quite sure about. And so again, that vulnerability, that safe, brave space gives students the opportunity to talk about those instances together and to dialogue about them. One of the things that I recognize as well is that there are English language learners all across this nation and all across North America. And so this particular project offers students the ability to practice language and to give students the tools to be able to say, what you said was racist, and here's how. Here's how I know that. What you said was hurtful, and this is what you need to know. Giving students the backstory to some of the language that they might be trying out. If it's a racial slur, giving students that history about that slur and why it came to be is really important, even from our youngest learners, so that they're aware that words hurt and words can hurt, but there are ways that we can rectify and change that. So that's the first inquiry-based project. The second one is to create an art gallery with your students. And for those of you that maybe don't teach art, it's a great way to incorporate a bit of an artistic flair for students. Not every kid loves art. As a teacher, I didn't love teaching art, I'll be very honest, but the ability to give students a creative outlet without a paper and a pencil is something that I think is really important. And again, take some barriers away for some of our English language learners who might not have the language yet or the skills to piece together some of those sentences in the essays or paragraphs we might have them write. Every student is capable of creating a piece of art. And so I wanted to make it a little bit more equitable in that way. Lastly, there's an appendix and a glossary, and I wrote a letter to parents that's in there. And I wrote a letter to parents, not necessarily asking them for permission to talk about these things, but to give them the heads up that, hey, our class for the next 3 weeks is going to be discussing these difficult topics. Feel free to have these conversations at the dinner table or reach out if you need support. And I've told educators all across Canada that I've worked with, if you are uncomfortable signing your name to that letter, go ahead and sign mine and put my email address. I love a spicy conversation and I'm not afraid to have them. And so I offer that to you as well. If you are feeling like you're in a space where you don't necessarily want to test Timmy's mom, I love a test. So go ahead and throw my name on there if you choose to use this resource and maybe want some guidance or some support in connecting with parents in your school. The main message of this program is that we all have a role to play when it comes to having an anti-racist society. It's not up to the principal, it's not up to the janitor, it's not up to the secretary or the sixth grade class. It's up to every single person in your school, in your community, in your city, in our world, to make our spaces more inclusive and anti-racist. There's so many secondary messages that come about in this program as well, and they're tied to the individuals that I got to speak with. We filmed all of these videos I mentioned. I spent about 2 hours with each person, and those were condensed into 5-minute videos so that you can watch them in your classroom. Now, I know that I won't have time to show you one today, but I have a QR code on the next slide that will take you to the website, and the videos are on there. So in your own time, you can take a look at those. Um, we all have an identity made up of multiple entities is one of the secondary messages. That just simply means, for example, if I use myself, I'm more than just a Black woman. I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a basketball player. I love naps, I love baking, I love Netflix. There's so many things that make up who I am as a person. And so we want our students to be able to see their identity in multiple entities, and to also recognize that their peers have multiple entities that make them unique as well. People from racialized communities have different lived experiences and need to be given space to speak about their story. I mentioned earlier that Luke reached out and asked if I would be willing to present this round. I could have sent Luke this presentation and said, go for it. But he offered me the ability to connect with you all this evening. And so that's a really cool thing. And I think we need to do that more with folks in our communities and our students, give them the opportunity to tell their own story, to talk about culture, to talk about their identity, to talk about the things that make them happy. It's important to give them the microphone every so often. Acceptance and allyship are key elements of anti-racism. That one's really important to me, especially in my conversation with Dimitri, not really understanding, as I mentioned before, at that time, how someone could identify with multiple pronouns. And although at the time I didn't get it, I chose to accept it because it's not perhaps for me to get. But as I got to learn more from this wonderful individual, not only did I accept it, now I consider myself even more of an ally, and I can stand behind him and say, this is this is how I can help and support you when the trolls get bad online, or when people vilify you in the media if they chose to, or if there are people that had something negative to say about the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. Not even just standing behind Dimitri, but standing with Dimitri is an important thing that acceptance and allyship brings. And lastly, we all have the ability to learn and unlearn about microaggressions and bias. Kids need to know that we all have bias, and that's totally fine. Um, I am a child of the 90s, and so growing up, I heard a lot of not so great things, a lot of stereotypes and microaggressive things that at the time I knew were wrong, but now as a young woman, know even more so um, are completely wrong. And so I have the ability to unlearn some of those nasty, hateful things that I heard in the hallways, on TV, some of the stereotypes that I've heard and seen. I can unlearn those things and replace them with good qualities and traits of folks. Oh, I lied. This is not the QR code I was talking about. This is just a sample of what the lessons look like. So they're all just a page. And this was one of the prototypes. You'll notice here it says link to YouTube videos. It now has YouTube videos in place. But each of these lessons has driving questions, an objective, a summary, some activities that you can do with your students, and a reflection. In this space, it's really important to give time for kids to sit and think about what they've learned, how this might relate to them. I've often told teachers we need to allow kids to sit in the yuck for a little bit. And sometimes it's really gross to think like, wow, people really just don't accept people because of who they are. Yes, we need to sit in that. We need to think about that and think about why that makes us feel the way we feel. If we feel some type of way about a group of people, we need to think about why we feel that way. And I want students to be able to do that and vocalize and talk about it. That's what that safe or brave space is all about. The ability to take what we know, what we've learned, and digest it. Think about it. Now, this is the QR code I was referring to. It'll take you to humanrights.ca. Which is where our website is. If you don't want to scan the QR code and you go to humanrights.ca, click on education, and under the education tab, you'll see all of our programs, but Pass the Mic is there, and it has the teacher's guide, which is a free PDF download. It's also available in French. The whole website is available in French, and all 3 videos are there. Additionally, I have questions posed from those 3 folks about our journey together, what we talked about, and I asked them to have questions for students so that if you wanted to pose a question to the students in your class, one of Dawn's questions is, why are invasive questions harmful? So you may need to unpack that with a younger audience, but with maybe a high school audience, you can talk about why maybe we don't ask Black women about their hair or ask to touch it, for example, or maybe we don't ask about stereotypes that we've heard. She talks a lot about that in her video, and she talks about allyship and how allyship doesn't have to be a super loud thing. And so those are the types of questions that you'll find on the landing page, but within the teacher's guide, there's plenty of those resources for you as well. I believe I'm nearly at the end of my time, so I'm really grateful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to connect with you folks this evening. Our mailing list, as I mentioned there, is that QR code. It offers you bursaries and scholarship opportunities to do some really great human rights and democracy work in your classroom. This is my work email, so feel free to reach out if you're thinking, I'd love to try this, but I'm not quite sure where to start. I'm happy to jump on a call with you to chat it through. That's our website, and I think I'm at my time. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. To our attendees, if you have a question, through any of these presentations, feel free to drop it in the Q&A and we'll make sure it gets answered. Sarah, thank you so much for your vulnerability. I think you sharing some of your stories, like when you asked the question about the pizza and the pineapple and your student kind of like was like, this is not the right time. Like, I appreciate that because I think sometimes we feel like we have to be the keeper of knowledge and the perfect person in the room, and like we're there learning with them. So I appreciate you being vulnerable. I do have a question for you quickly. We still have a couple minutes.
Sure.
If you, as you have educators engaging in this, have you ever hit any road bumps, or have they? And what advice would you give someone who does receive some pushback in trying to engage in this curriculum?
For sure. I was working with a school here in Edmonton, and I had a parent actually show up at a school that I was working with, and told me that all of this is too woke for this community, and said so in front of the students that I was working with. And I was so lucky to have the ear of the administrator. She was one of my former administrators, and so I was lucky enough to have a great connection in her, where she was then able to kind of talk that parent down and continue to say and agree with me that we're not necessarily asking you for permission. We are simply doing this because our kids are encountering things more quickly than we can kind of keep up with it. And the ability to speak with that parent, I think face to face was a really important thing, but having the support of an administrator and of course doing so in a more public space, I found was really key. I would have been silly of me to have that conversation with an angry an angry man behind a closed door. To do so in the office with the principal, I think was really, really important and was key to really bringing that individual who was quite heightened down to say, like, well, based on, my lived experience, this isn't just, you know, a myth. This is what's happening. This gentleman was asking me for data and graphs, and how do you know that this is happening at this rate? And I was able to simply say, this is just simply my lived experience and the lived experience of a lot of our students. And so this is why we're doing this. This is not me telling you that, is it okay if on Tuesdays no, this is me saying it's going to happen. I'm so sorry if you don't agree. However, this will only better your child. And post that conversation, that parent did come back and say, you know what? I was a little hot in the head and I apologize for what I said to you. And so that was a really reassuring thing that we're on the right track. We're gonna encompass those speed bumps every so often, but it's important to persevere and kind of power through.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Mostly because I feel like I've had this question before of when is someone too young to learn something like this? And I got the best advice, which reminds me of what you said of like, if they are young enough to experience racism or microaggressions, they're young enough to learn about it.
Absolutely.
And so I think the work that you're doing is really powerful.
Thank you.
Of course, I have all these notes on my page and I'm trying to like go through it right now because it's a little illegible. I'm not excited. Um, one thing I was saying is I think that this program should also be offered to like early teacher prep programs, right? Because I think this work has to happen in the very beginning. It shouldn't
Totally.
be a question of like an educator can choose when to talk about racism. Like this should be 101, day one of your teacher prep program, because this is on the daily, whether we experience it ourselves or our students experience it, somebody in the room is feeling something and we have to be
For
there.
sure. Agreed.
So thank you so much.
Thank
I will
you.
pass it over to our next introduction.
Yeah, Sarah, I took notes too. I think the most powerful thing that you continue to emphasize was choice, like choices, like we all have choices. And you made a lot of choices with that conversation because you could have made other choices, but I think that was one of the most provocative pieces of that. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Henry.
For sure. All right. Our next speaker is Ebony Beckham. Ebony Beckham is a dedicated and passionate secondary English educator with over 7 years of experience working with young learners in diverse educational settings. She has her master's in English and in English and integrated language arts education from The Ohio State University, national champion, Ohio State. And has taught both middle and high school levels. Currently, she's teaching middle school and within space in Central Ohio and specializes in engaging standards-based instruction that fosters critical thinking and problem-solving skills. Her work extends to supporting college-bound students through the Upward Bound program, where she's provided where she provides targeted instruction and mentorship that focuses on student growth and academic excellence. She is committed to creating an inclusive and dynamic learning environment where students can connect with literature, develop strong communication skills, and build confidence in their abilities. And I can personally attest to that because we are former colleagues, and that was my teacher neighbor. So I know for a fact that she teaches with passion, and we're in for a treat. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Ms. Beckham.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you today. I have quite a bit to share with you, so I'll go ahead and begin. I think I'm having a little bit of trouble sharing my screen. 1 second. Let's see if I can download.
In the meantime, while you do that, Ms. Beckham, if you have questions throughout the program, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function down below. Carmen, Luke, and I are checking that and monitoring it. So if you have questions, please put those in, whether that's before, during, in the middle of a presentation. If you have questions that you might want to save to the end, just go ahead and feel free to do that. Also, I'm going to drop in the chat. Oh, Carmen dropped that in the chat, the the curriculum for Democracy 2025. So make sure you check that out on the website as well. I have a lot of different things that we are offering. And there is an event, I believe it's on the 27th, I believe. And we'll drop that in the chat towards the end of the presentation. Perfect timing, right?
Wonderful. Okay, I hope that
Right.
everyone can see this. So we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, great.
Okay,
so fantastic. So hi, everyone. My name is Ebony Beckham, and we are going to talk about how to bring history to life through the power of historical fiction in the classroom. So we'll go ahead and begin. I want to thank Ivory for that wonderful introduction. I just wanted to, speak for a few moments on a few other things that were not mentioned in that introduction. So I attended one of the educator learning tours in early 2024 and had an absolute transformative experience. And, ever since I've been able to attend that tour, it's definitely taught me a lot about how to utilize content within the classroom. I believe that while on that tour, it was very clear, as an English teacher, there were few and far between in a group of many social studies teachers. And so it has been really great to continue to connect with folks that I was able to tour with and be able to work with the Institute on all the new things that have come down the pipeline. I also had the great opportunity to attend the Institute for Common Powers Educator Symposium in summer of 2024. And then a little bit more about me. I'm a Cleveland, Ohio native, so we're definitely enjoying all of the snow that's coming here, especially that came here earlier today. I'm a pretty persistent Browns fan, and we're always going forth with the motto, there's always next year. And so that is staying true season after season. And I'm also a pretty cool 90s R&B enthusiast. So anytime you'd like to talk about some 90s R&B, especially growing up in the 90s, please let me know. So here's where we are. The basis of this presentation today talks a lot about the type of literature that we use within the classroom. Now, I'm not just talking about the language arts classroom, I'm talking about every classroom. And so when I think about my own experience and not just English class, but also social studies class, what I noticed is these were some of the texts that were prioritized within those classroom spaces. And one of the things that always frustrated me as a student is like, man, like the characters in these texts don't really fit with who I am. And this doesn't really help me understand the content, right? I'm unable to connect with these texts. This doesn't help me engage with the things that I am learning about. And so, a part of what drives me to utilize historical fiction within the classroom is its ability to, in a greater way, connect with the students that most of us serve today. So I want to start us off and kind of further us from a quote provided by one of our educator ambassadors who was in the same cohort as the Educator Symposium this past summer, and his name is Jeffrey C. White. I was listening to a podcast that he has founded along with another colleague, and he wrote an original piece for this podcast and shared it at the beginning. So I'm going to read this to you and then kind of talk through how it's connected to what we're going to talk about today. So it says, they call it history as if it were a sealed vault, as if it did not haunt the breath between syllables in courtrooms, as if it did not whisper through the steel bars of privatized cells, as if the chains were ever truly unshackled or the gavel ever truly blind. And so when I think about this, I feel like it's incredibly important to tackle history not as if it's just this collection of items that we take off of a shelf whenever we feel like we need it in order to feel informed, but it's truly a human experience, right? The things that we study in the past and their connection to what is happening currently has everything to do with how we live life. And that is another reason why I feel that historical fiction is so incredibly powerful. So let's talk about historical fiction. Historical fiction is a genre of literature that began in the early 19th century over in Europe. And so it essentially pairs real historical events and eras with fictional characters and stories. And so one of the benefits that I see with historical fiction is its ability to be so culturally relevant, especially when I think about the students that I serve in the classroom. So the characters that are included in these novels typically are around my students' ages. And because of that, they experience a lot of the same emotions that my students do, a lot of the same problems and conflicts that my students do. And so it continuously allows there to be an avenue for students to be able to connect with these texts and also the historical era that the text is founded in. Historical fiction is also great for students' own social emotional engagement. All of you who teach, middle grades and secondary grades, I'm sure you've noticed that our students' problem solving skills are a little low. And so, especially in this generation. And so, one of the things that I really enjoy, and then I've seen students really pick up on too, is the ability for students to experience problem solving through the lens of a character, right? Because these characters are the same age as some of the students or that are in the classroom, they can then see how these characters navigate not just through this really tumultuous or earth-shaking historical era or event, but also through their own life. So they are able to pick up on some of those problem solving skills through the conflicts that they experience, whether it be with a friend, another person, or just with the era itself. And I do believe that has a tremendous impact on their own development as a young person. And then one of the last, or not last benefit, but another benefit that I see also with historical fiction is just the retention of that historical era, the information, the content that we learn about in that historical era. So when we combine, the imagination, which comes through so much in this fictional writing, also with this historical era, I find that the use of storytelling really helps kids hold on to that information. And so because of that, historical fiction seems to be just another avenue for students to really pick up on things that, once felt so far away from them because they happened, 50, 60, hundreds of years ago. Now, what I will say about historical fiction is in no way is this a replacement for primary sources or nonfiction texts, memoirs, biographies, autobiographies that tell really powerful tales about what has occurred through these historical eras and events. But it's just another way to see those things and to give students the opportunity to grow closer to most of what people have experienced within those specific times. So I wanted to give educators some practical applications of this, form of literature. Those of you who have never seen it before may not know how to immediately apply that within the classroom. So myself, I teach a historical fiction unit in the spring that's in the form of book clubs. And so one thing that I like to do with historical fiction novels is allow students autonomy within the novels that they choose so that they can then dictate the historical eras that they want to learn about. One of the things that I recognize is I teach 7th grade language arts. And so a lot of the time, the historical eras that students choose don't exactly line up with when they learn them in social studies. So sometimes we have to do a lot of work building background knowledge on those historical fiction novels. But that is where I feel like book clubs are so powerful because they can share knowledge with their peers to help them more greatly connect to the era that they're learning about. Another thing that I really like to do within the classroom is read alouds. Now, regardless of what any student tells you, all students love to be read to, whether that is through an audiobook or just through a whole class reading, whether it be an excerpt or something of that sort. I think that pulling in specific pieces from historical fiction novels and reading them aloud to the class promotes a space for whole class discussions, small group discussions, turn and talks, and things of that nature. And then one of my favorite ways to apply utilizing historical fiction text to complement the instruction of historical content is this strategy called Students as Experts. So I kind of think about this specific strategy through this saying, like, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. And so just because a novel is categorized as historical fiction doesn't necessarily mean that the novel has been written in the most historically accurate way, because there's an element that is fiction. And so with this specific strategy, you are able to encourage students to use primary sources, other nonfiction texts, and then any other historical data that they can get their hands on to determine whether or not the writer has used this information in the most accurate form. And I feel like putting students in the driver's seat of their own learning is the best form. And so I've had a lot of success using this specific strategy within the classroom. And my students have also explained how much they enjoy this form as well. And then the last is also the opportunity for extension activities. So using this within the classroom could be from anything, something like designing self-guided research opportunities for students, similar to like a Genius Hour, where students pick something specific that they want to learn about, and then they spend time studying that and then share what they have learned throughout the time that they have spent, designing multimedia presentations, or even having like whole class debates or discussions through the form of fishbowl discussions or Socratic seminars. Those have always felt like they provide an additional opportunity for students to really critically think about the information that they're learning about within these novels, and then also, you know, with the information that they learn alongside of the reading that they're doing with these novels. So here are some examples of some of the things that I have done in the classroom with historical fiction novels and this historical fiction book club unit. So throughout the unit, students meet in book clubs to talk about the types of things that they have noticed within their historical fiction books. And then they bring that together along with their understanding of various literary elements like plot and conflict and theme and characters and minor characters. And they create what is called a companion poster. And so this companion poster is a like a summative assessment that we do that helps students analyze the information that they have learned alongside the course or along the course of the unit. And then they're able to, you know, practice their ability to cite text evidence effectively. We know we all love that. Using and creating timelines, a timeline of the historical era, and then also a timeline of the character. And so they can then determine whether or not the character is living in this, you know, alternate reality, or whether or not they're actually experiencing life alongside the events within this historical era. And I really enjoy this because students meet as book clubs. Over the course of the unit, they design this poster that they then share with the class alongside any, you know, key ideas or details that they want to share. So they create these mini chapters and they use them to just talk about their own learning, talk about the conversations that they've had in their book clubs. And so the top picture is an example of a book club who read the graphic novel Whitebird by R.J. Palacio, and they spent time working together to create the things that you see. And then the bottom one is an example of a poster that a book club who read Turtle in Paradise by Jennifer L. Holm. And this graphic novel at the bottom focuses on the history, or is like based in the era of the Great Depression. And then the one at the top is based on the events surrounding the Holocaust. And another example is some historical era research that we do typically over the course of the unit. As I've said before, I find that many students tend to be unable to connect with content that is that has occurred before they were alive. And so a good way to get them more involved with their own learning is to have them do some research on this historical era that they're reading about, but also need to know about. In order for you to talk about this historical era, you kind of got to know what's happening in this historical era. So in this form of research, we use lots of nonfiction text. So they can be picture books, they can be videos, they can be graphic novels, memoirs, texts that help students understand what people during this era were going through, how they were facing challenges. And again, it kind of emphasizes this ability to problem solve, to communicate, to fight for what it is you feel like is just and is right. And they can then use that on their like final project, which is the companion poster. And what I wanted to share with you all today is a bit of a collection. So I have created a Padlet that is like a platform that you can like add different things to. But this Padlet includes several different novels and like quick one sentence summaries that can be used as historical fiction novels within the classroom. And, you know, as always, I would say, you know, use your professional discretion when assigning these specific novels to students. But I wanted to take a little bit of time to walk through what you would see on this Padlet. So I am going to come out of this slideshow and pull this up. And so some of the errors that are on this Padlet right now are errors that I have, you know, used within the classroom. So the first one over here is on 9/11. And so we have various novels that walk students through a character's experience, whether they are in New York or in another in another area of the world while they're experiencing that tragedy. So we have a novel by Jewel Parker Rhodes, one by Alan Gratz called Ground Zero. We have a graphic novel, and I Survived by Scholastic has a series of novels that work through various events around the world. So they have novels on Hurricane Katrina, novels on 9/11, novels on like wildfires in California. So I find that this one for students, especially students who have lower reading levels, is a little bit more accessible in the classroom. But this is something that most students have liked when they have read this. And then we have novels that depict parent stories and also like stories of students who are like reliving this specific event based on what they remember as they were younger. And then we have novels on the civil rights movement. And so one of my favorite to use within the classroom is Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. And so it's kind of like a collection of journal diary entries as she's navigating life in Ohio during the 1960s. And so I've always thought that this was really powerful. And then another novel that I've used in the classroom is called X. And so this is kind of a depiction of Malcolm X's childhood. And I thought that this was really awesome because it was created by his daughter. So she was one of the co-authors. So I thought that this was an awesome way to help students connect to what they would learn about with the civil rights movement. And one of my favorites to read and engage with, especially as a student in college, was The Watsons Go to Birmingham. So this is by Christopher Paul Curtis. I think that this one, especially, you know, having middle grade students who may have, I'm a special education teacher also, so students who may have lower reading levels, this one seems to be a lot more accessible for them as well. Other categories that we have are the Great Depression, the Holocaust, World War II. We have some novels on COVID-19. This wouldn't exactly be considered historical fiction yet, because usually historical fiction is anything like 50 years and beyond. But a lot of my students have lived through COVID-19, and I don't believe that we've really had a chance for them to process and talk about that within the classroom, especially in the form of literature. So a few novels that I've enjoyed reading are within this specific column. So we got Ain't Burned All the Bright by Jason Reynolds and Jason Griffin. And this is kind of in the form of a picture book. And the imagery within this novel is incredibly powerful. We have a few more: When the World Turned Upside Down, and then Morning Sun in Wuhan. this is also a good one to give a perspective of like a young person in Wuhan during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we also have the Vietnam War. We have some novels on enslavement, and then resistance, empowerment, and liberation. So this is something that can be sort of like a running resource. Visitors to this Padlet, I believe it was shared in the chat, have writing ability. So you can submit a novel or comment on a novel. And then I'll just go through and approve it, and then it'll appear on the Padlet. So if you have ideas for other eras of time that you would like to include, or other novels that you've had a lot of success with, or one that you see on here that your students really didn't like, and so maybe we take another look at it, that is also fine. But I just wanted to share, all of the good that I've been able to do with historical fiction, in hopes that we can incorporate in more classrooms, whether that be an ELA classroom or a social studies classroom. I find that, the more, when I think about where my students are, especially this year, one of the things that's a little disheartening is I'm finding that their reading levels are not getting much higher. And some of that can be explained by the effects of COVID. But at the same time, I feel that, if we expect students to grow and, be on grade level, if we expect them to be able to be successful, and we think about all of these standardized tests that don't seem to be going away, one of the things that we really ought to encourage them to do is read. And so I believe that, through using novels that pull on their imagination, that teach them about how to problem solve, and even how to navigate, really, really tough times, is through historical fiction novels. So with that said, I believe that I'm at least close to my time. And so I'll pull back up my slideshow, but I just have a slide for questions and my contact info. So thank you guys so much for your attention and the opportunity to share what I have been doing in the classroom.
Yes, Ebony, thank you so much. Ms. Beckham, thank you so much. That was great. I just have one question for you, because I remember you teaching The Hate U Give, so kind of, putting a spin on the historical fiction. But what would you say, including that and all that you've done thus far in the classroom, what would you say has been the biggest takeaway from introducing students to history as it relates to English language arts in the classroom? What's been your biggest reward from doing that?
I would say my biggest reward from doing this is being able to showcase stories that have people in them that reflect the population of the students that I serve. So being able to create a space where my students are centered and aren't an afterthought, being able to create spaces where they feel like they are like included within. I find that a lot of my own experience with literature didn't include me. It just, these are the highly renowned titles. This is what everyone has to use. This is what is going to be on our standardized test. So we only have room for these stories. And so I think that my greatest reward in doing this is being able to, boldly and confidently highlight stories that reflect my students, and to show them that they matter, even if it's just like one story at a time. So I would say that's definitely my greatest reward.
Okay, thank you. For those of you that are on, remember to utilize the chat. Ebony, go ahead and, thank you. Make sure you utilize the chat. And then I am going to put in the link to the vision conversation that'll be happening with Dr. Eric Foner, and that'll be on the 18th. And I will pass it to who's introducing Candace?
I,
Luke.
I got
We'll pass it
I
to
got
you.
it. Yeah. But before Miss Beckham goes, I just want to ask real quick, could you tell us about like your favorite work of historical fiction? Is it one of these or is it something else? And what do you love about it?
I would say right now, my favorite work is a work that I've been trying to like um incorporate as my mentor text for this unit. And I believe I shared this on the bus when we were like moving to a site during the educator symposium. So I really, really enjoyed Ain't Burn All the Bright by Jason Reynolds. I felt that it was incredibly powerful, especially just as a picture book. The book itself is probably um like 200 pages, but it's mostly pictures. The book itself is about 3 sentences long, but again, mostly pictures. And so I have really enjoyed the way that these two authors, or author and illustrator, have been able to depict, what it feels like to experience a worldwide pandemic as a kid, and what it feels like to navigate the anxiety of not knowing what's going to happen next, to like, oh no, my dad is sick and I don't know what's going to happen to him. And like, oh no, my mom's not the same because she will refuse to, like, she's refusing to not look at the news. But then to also be able to find space to just breathe, like, even in the midst of all of that, like, I still need to be kind to myself. I still need to recognize like who I am and like how I want to respond to this. And so I find that that novel itself has been able to do that even in those 3 sentences. So I've lately, that's been my favorite. It may change this spring, but lately that's been my favorite.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. Thank you. And I love the idea that I wrote this down as something like I want to partner with my English department now to take this work and turn that into research on the history. I think that's a really powerful pairing and just a really smart way to put all of this together. Thanks for being with us. It was really incredible. Appreciate all
Thank
that
you.
you're doing. I'm going to transition us to our next speaker, which I'm very excited about. Miss Candace Logan. I've had the chance to travel on a couple of learning tours with Candace and gotten to know her well and just really appreciate her. She's brilliant, first of all, which you're all about to see. But she's also just this really genuine, caring, fierce, smart person. And I'm thrilled that she's taken a half hour of her time to be with us tonight. So I'll tell you a little bit more about her, and then Candace, they're all yours. Candace Logan is the Executive Director of Teaching for Equity, Empowerment, and Community Healing, or TEACH. Prior to joining TEACH, Candace was the Executive Director of Dreamline, a school-based mentoring program located in K-12 schools across the Twin Cities metro area and greater Minnesota. Before leading Dreamline, Candace worked in Minneapolis public schools for 10 years. She held numerous progressive roles with the district. Her last role was serving as the Executive Director of Equity, Integration, and Social Emotional Learning. A former education consultant and classroom teacher, she's traveled the country facilitating workshops and coaching educators on creating positive and affirming learning environments with their students. And she's here tonight. Candace, they're all yours. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Luke. Hello, everyone. First, I'm just gonna get this out of the way. And Ivory, I greatly appreciate you. As I do with Luke, I sent a text message to Ivory yesterday. I was like, yo, I am super nervous about this thing, and it's too late to back out. No, one of the hardest things about being in front of teachers is being in front of teachers, right? So if anyone who's ever had to lead professional development in their school, particularly among their own colleagues, it's very challenging because they've seen you on your best days and they've seen you on your not so best days. Um, I'm fortunate in that a handful of you, like on the panel, know me, and there might be other people in the audience that were on a trip with me, and I'm very thankful to be in this space. And that doesn't decrease the amount of anxiety that I have right now. So I'm just figured, like, for me, I just need to put it into the space and then I can breathe. So I thank you so much for this opportunity. I should have said early on, Happy Black History Month. Yes, very happy to be here. I'm honored to be sharing time and space with such a dynamic panel, as well as all of you dynamic people who chose to spend part of your Sunday evening online with us learning. My mom got me a T-shirt years ago that says what does it say? Something like the truly educated never graduate. And so when I think about that as like as an educator, if you really are about that work, that you never graduate from whatever that higher institution is, and there's a continuous thirst of learning. So enough with my preamble. Again, thank you for the time and space. I'm going to try to share my slide deck. I practiced it beforehand. Let's see. Let me do in slideshow. All right. I am a Rondo native. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, specifically the Rondo neighborhood of St. Paul, which was, it was a predominantly Black neighborhood way back in the day. And I'll spend the next few minutes I'll spend with you. We'll talk about where Rondo was, where it currently is, and where it's going. So a little bit of info. This sign here is actually the intersection of about 2 blocks west of my house is this intersection of Concordia, Victoria, and Rondo. The home that I live in right now is on Concordia when I bought it was on Concordia. And this past year, it's officially been renamed Rondo to represent the neighborhood that is currently underneath the freeway that you'll see behind the sign, which is I-94. Rondo is currently a very thriving neighborhood. I do think it's important, though, to talk about the neighborhood's history in terms of how it was founded, what it transformed into, and then what it is right now. So I will share just a little bit about the founding. Rondo was established in, oh gosh, I'm not gonna the date. The date fails me. Hold on a second, let me grab my note. Rondo was founded by a French Canadian named Joseph Rondeau, who first settled by the Mississippi River. He and his wife, Josephine, settled by the Mississippi River near Fort Snelling. So anyone that's familiar with Minnesota history knows that Fort Snelling was a fort that had a lot of horrible things happen that the United States government had a responsibility for. And Joseph Rondeau was a French Canadian who settled by that river, trying to carve out a life with he and his wife, and they were ran off of that river. Specifically because his wife was of indigenous descent and they were faced with racism. So they moved further closer to St. Paul, where they were able to purchase about 40 acres of land, which eventually became known as Rondo. His last name is spelled Rondeau. And in the way that our country is so good about taking names away, changed it to Rondo. And so that is what the neighborhood has been known for since then. I will spend just a little bit of time on Joseph Rondo and then go into some of the more important people who are who helped found, Rondo neighborhood. Once Joseph Rondeau moved to the now Rondo neighborhood, a lot of other immigrants started to follow him. So French Canadian immigrants who had followed him who came to Fort Snelling with him, followed him to Rondo, as well as later on German, Russian, Irish, and Jewish families made Rondo their home. And it's important to state all of those groups that I named because there is currently in 2025, there's a misconception that because Rondo, we talk about it being historically Black, that it's always been historically Black. And one of the learnings that I made as I was preparing for this presentation is that Rondo has always been a racially and culturally diverse area. starting with the group of people I shared earlier, German, Russian, Irish, Jewish, and French Canadian, and then later Black. So 40 acres of land was purchased. Now you're gonna get in a time travel machine with me because I was like the 1800s, and we're gonna fly a couple decades, and I'm going to bring up two places that are really important to Rondo history, and it is slightly connected. And that is, as time passes, Joseph Rondo and his wife Josephine move on. Many of the families that had settled, the Russian families, the Jewish families, the German families, and the Irish families, as they acquired more wealth, they moved out of Rondo onto, if you know the Jeffersons, the deluxe apartment in the sky, they moved on to quote unquote better places. And so then Rondo then opened up and became more available to Black families as they were moving from the South. Something, a very, very important person to Minnesota history and to Minnesota Black history is Reverend Robert Thomas Hickman, who was one of the founding members of Pilgrim Baptist Church. He, in 1863, founded Pilgrim Baptist Church after he and about 100 plus formerly enslaved African Americans came up the Mississippi River on a steamboat known as the Northerner, and they had escaped from the plantations where they worked. They all came to Fort Snelling and they found themselves in Rondo. He was one of again, the very first pastor of Rondo. And because I live in Rondo and I know some of a few of the last names started to resonate. There's a current resident of Rondo who is a descendant of Reverend Robert Thomas Hickman, and her name is Robin Hickman. And she's an amazing historian and does a lot of incredible work preserving Rondo history. Pilgrim is very important as it was the very first African American Baptist church that was established and the oldest in Minnesota. This picture here where you see the church off to the left of Reverend Hickman is Pilgrim's second building. To the other side of him, you will see Pilgrim's current building, which is literally across the bridge or across the freeway of 94 from my home. And you'll see members in the front row, members in the front of the new building when the building was opened on December 16th, 1928. The important thing, the reason why I wanted to mention Pilgrim is not because it was the first Black Baptist church, but because it is also, it's been a home place. If anyone's read Bell Hooks's work and you think about the place where you can go and be seen and be understood without saying a word, a place to go and get renewed and rejuvenated and fed physically, mentally, and spiritually. So Pilgrim is still that church where many of us, it's a church that I remember going to as a child, and it is still very active in the community, still looks almost the same as it does, aside from a few updates. It's a beautiful brick building nestled right in the middle of Rondo. And so I want to mention that because church was an important piece of the Rondo residents. I don't want to generalize, but from my understanding, as a people, our spirituality as Black people has always been very strong. So when I think about the church being the place where you are maybe mentally, physically, and spiritually fed, it's also a place where you went to get information. It was a place where you went to get support, and it is still that place for many of us in Rondo. As the neighborhood started to change and more African Americans were moving from the South to the North, because at some point, Rondo became known as that safe haven. So I shared that earlier about about Pilgrim, but Rondo itself became known among Black families as word was spreading that was the place to go. If you were coming to Minnesota, you should settle in St. Paul and Rondo, because that was a place where folks would help you find a place to stay. They'd help you find work. They would help you find childcare if you needed. You'd have a place to get yourself grounded so that you could make roots there. Staying informed and connected in Rondo was also important. We had 3 Black-owned newspapers, the Appeal, the Northwestern, and the St. Paul Recorder. That was a place where we learned about jobs. We learned about what was happening across the country. And as times were changing and we started moving into the 50s and 60s, those newspapers were the ones that also posted when a particular business was discriminating against Blacks. So it basically put folks on blast. If you're gonna be racist, we're gonna put you on blast. And so our newspapers were used not only to inform about happenings across the country, but also to let folks know what places either to avoid shopping or double down on what places to go and integrate. Another important piece in 1913, St. Paul established its chapter of the NAACP. Roy Wilkins, who later went on to lead the national NAACP, was a resident of Rondo and one of the founding members of the St. Paul chapter. Another community piece, and it's still the community organization is still in existence now, is the Sterling Club. And I'm naming these places, particularly the Sterling Club, because at the time, as great as life, I shouldn't say great, life in Minnesota was very different than, say, life in Mississippi. And I can say that because I have family who migrated from Mississippi to the north. And still, as progressive as Rondo may have felt, as integrated as it was, there were still racist interactions that were happening as Black men and Black women still interacted with white folks. Living in the North didn't mean that people were separate from their racist beliefs. So the Sterling Club was founded in 1918 by a group of prominent African American leaders. It included porters, included waiters, drivers, and other residents of the Rondo community. Specifically, men were a part of the Sterling Club, and it existed to create another home place for Black men to talk about how they were bettering themselves, how to better the community, but also to talk through and process some of the injustices that they as Black men were experiencing. And I can imagine having a place like the Sterling Club was vital so that Black men can be seen, can be heard, can be affirmed, and recognize that they are still full human beings regardless of their treatment. And that allowed them to be able to go home and be in a loving space and be welcomed and to welcome their families. Another very important area in Rondo, in addition to Pilgrim Baptist Church, was Hallie Q. Brown House. Was founded in 1929. I shared earlier that as word was spreading to the South and other areas, Southern Blacks were making their way to Minnesota. Around that same time, there were many other folks who were settling into Minnesota. Many Europeans were moving to St. Paul and other cities, and there were rooming houses available for them and services available for them to find jobs, to find housing, to also childcare and all of those things. And what it was said that Black folks didn't need that because they could figure out on their own how to make their way. So when little commentary, when people talk about us being resilient as a people, it's not like we were actually saying, hey, give us some more exercises so we can practice being resilient. It was just presumed that we could figure out our way, or it wasn't a priority. So either way, we always make a way out of no way. So Hallie Q. Brown was founded in 1929 to be that space. I'm going to name it's another home place, so that's going to be my theme for tonight. Hallie Q. Brown became and still is a home place for residents in the Rondo community. It became a place where golden agers, as you can see in one of those pictures, could get our elders could come together, commune with one another, and do things like play chess or just talk about what's happening, or maybe talk about what Rondo was like for them when they were small kids. Hallie Q. Brown House also became a place where children parents could have their child receive daycare or childcare in that space. You'll see 2 pictures, one where there's a little boy receiving a dose of cod liver oil from an adult in the room. And then down at the bottom, you'll see a group of children who are preschoolers having lunch with their teacher. Hallie Q. Brown was also the place where you could get access to health care. You could, if you were a family that was interested in getting their child, or in this picture, their young man, involved in archery. There were a lot of extra activities that folks could participate in that may not have been available outside of the Rondo neighborhood. To make sure I'm hitting all the things. Camping, archery, athletics, home economics. Hallie was known as the place where you could escape from the stresses of life. I will say, as an elementary age child, Hallie Q. Brown Community Center is what it's known now, is where I went after school. Me and my cousins would go there right after school. We were latchkey kids, and to the best of their ability, our parents didn't want us necessarily sitting at home by ourselves, so we would get the school bus, go to Hallie Q. Brown, and we'd for sure have a snack. We'd go to piano lessons, we'd go to the gym to play basketball, or we'd go to the main space to do our homework. So to see Hallie Q. Brown, founded in 1929 and still is open to the community today, is it's a beautiful thing. I don't want to miss the picture above that shows the Hallie Q. Brown staff in 1935. If you were a Rondo resident in the, say, 30s, 40s, 50s, if you were like my Uncle Thomas, who is my mom's uncle, you might have worked in in the first picture, which is Armours. So there were quite a few factory jobs, and many Rondo residents worked at how my aunts and uncles describe it as the meat packing plant. Meat packing plant. And as a kid, I thought that that was the name of the business, but then I find out later it's Armours that sold meat. So often, Rondo residents either worked at a meat packing plant or some other kind of factory. We also had residents who were doctors, as you'll see, the veterinarian there that's working with the Basset Hound. The original owner of my home that I'm in now, Mr. Willie Rice, was a waiter on the Great Northern train. There were other Rondo residents that were Pullman porters, and I think there was a term called red caps. They were educators, they were accountants, they were beauticians, business owners, and other professions lived in Rondo. So you can imagine you've got this thriving Black community in the 40s and the 50s, and you've got this range of salaries, and all of these folks are coming together, and they're going to church at either St. James AME Church, or they're going to Pilgrim Baptist Church. They may all go down to Hallie Q. Brown, because that was also the place where the Jack and Jill Club would gather, for those of you that are familiar with them, and other community events. So regardless of your financial status, what made you a Rondo resident was that the fact that you were part of this community, you're part of the fabric. The heartbeat of the Black community, again, thinking about the places, the locations where Blacks could shop. And when I shared earlier about when Joseph Rondo moved to Rondo, there were other racial and ethnic groups that followed. One little known fact that I found out as I was doing some research on Rondo, again, the neighborhood I grew up in, but it's one thing to hear about it, and it's another thing to actually to do a little more research, is that the neighborhood was racially integrated. Many of the neighbors were Black, Jewish, and some white families. And so as upward mobility touched some of the other racial and ethnic groups, in particular, the Jewish families were able to start moving out of Rondo into what is now Highland Park, St. Louis Park, which are first ring suburbs, and other areas. And what they left behind was availability of housing for Black families. And so this particular picture above the text is a grocery store. Excuse me, it was one of the first co-ops that was opened by the Crejaphon. You'll see off to the corner of that grocery store picture, a word that's a group of people, and then there's a sign in front of them that says CREDJAFAWN. I've been practicing that word ever since I've seen it. Crejaphon. That's the way I'm going to pronounce it. It's not actually a real word, because the letters make up the first letter of the 10 people that created this social group. And it was founded by 10 young women, 10 young Black women who came together and said, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on in Rondo, and there's not a lot that's focused on our age group. So let's activate ourselves and get together and create this thing, this group. And so that's what they did. And from that, with financial hope from the community and from themselves, they were able to open a co-op. And this co-op was actually previously owned by a Jewish grocer who, when he and his family moved out of the neighborhood, sold it to the Krejafon group, and they were able to open that grocery store. You'll also see down in the bottom corner a sign that says barbecue ribs. That was a restaurant that was called Booker T Cafe and Tavern. So after a long day's work, you could go to Booker T's and get some good barbecue and possibly a nice refreshing drink, and just chew the fat with your neighbors, and talk about the latest goings on, and maybe thinking about, you got a call or a letter from a family member down south who's about to migrate up to Minnesota, and maybe you're sitting around trying to figure out what you're going to do to help them get acclimated to Rondo, and maybe, just a lot of planning. Anytime there's food and and there's some people, there's some planning going on, some positive planning. The picture in the corner underneath the title, The Heartbeat, is a group of children who were going on a 2-week stay. Marvin Anderson, his name will come up a little later. He's a little boy with the hat on his head, and he's got his hands in his like power pose. He is still a Rondo resident here. He and his brother and some of his friends were going on a 2-week stay to a farm in Cherry Grove, Minnesota, and that was in 1948. So I'm reminded that though there were a lot of horrible things that were happening across the country and in Minnesota in 1948, there were still intentional moves to make sure that children had the most well-rounded and most full of love childhood as possible. And I thought about that, thinking about that when I was just recently on the Mississippi-Tennessee trip, and we spent time at Mr. Metger and Miss Merle Evers' home. And I'd always heard about him as being, a civil rights worker, and more about his death and less about his life. And being in his home and learning from my colleagues and learning from the staff in the at the residence, learning that he loved to go fishing with his neighbor and his children. And so I just put that in here to remind us that in the midst of all of the challenges that have happened historically in Rondo, in Mississippi, across the country, and even right now, we still have to find time and space to fill up our hearts, to remember why we're fighting for everything that we're doing. It's hard to fight when you are hopeless and weary. And so just wanted to touch on that really quick, because even in the midst of the challenges that were happening, we still find places for joy and send our kids to a 2-week trip on a farm. 1948. By the 1950s, I want to make sure I mention this, 85% of St. Paul's Black residents lived in Rondo. That's important. By the 1950s, 85% of St. Paul's Black residents lived in Rondo. Now, you got this thriving community. You got these churches that are bursting at the seams. You have children who are learning archery, who are experiencing like the fullness of life. You've got families who have migrated from the South, who have paid and worked really hard as Pullman porters or waiters, and had all kinds of injustices thrown at them in order to make money to buy a home for their family. And now you find out that your home, your neighborhood, is in the direct path of the city's plan to create a highway I-94. These two pictures, one I shared with you all, Marvin Anderson, a little while before with the power poles. This is actually him sitting on a tree stump looking at the bulldozers that have already torn down houses. Maybe one of them was his, as he was a Rondo native. And then the picture next to it is actually the exit right by my house, which is Dale Street. This was the construction of the freeway. I was talking with my mom last night as I was sharing with her some of the things that I was working on for this presentation, and she shared with me that she remembers being a kid and playing down in the dirt in the freeway when she would come up and visit her sister, her older sister, Clara. What we lost when I-94 was built, and the freeway was built from 1956 to 1968. 700 homes, 700 family homes were demolished. 300 businesses either closed or were torn down. And according to a study conducted by the Reconnect Rondo, the destruction of Rondo results in a loss of approximately 157 million in home equity value, adjusted for inflation, representing wealth that could not be passed on to future generations. So if you think about when people make comments about the state of Black people in particular, or I'll say Black people because I'll make it personal, local, and immediate, as though we don't work hard, as though if we just did a bit more, if we just pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps, we too could live the American dream. And what they don't say is, once you get close to whatever that quote unquote American dream is, guess what? We'll determine your neighborhood is a slum and we will run a freeway through it because we see no value in it, even though you see value in it. So it's this whole exercise and the research has been a reminder to me about not looking for value from other people, but recognizing who we are and whose we are, and the stock in which we come from. So this is what we lost. I will shift in a little bit so that we can look at some of what we have gained as a community in Rondo. I want to show this picture super quick. The Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul in 1940 is the more grayer picture. It's hard to really make out, but you can make out that those are houses and grass and streets and such. But if you look at the picture to the right of it, or to my right, you'll see the freeway cutting straight through Rondo. And so literally, Rondo is cut in half. My house faces my aunt's house, which is my mom's oldest sister. She's since passed, but her son lives there. My house faces her house across the freeway. So in the winter, from probably November until maybe March, I can look in my kitchen window and see my cousin when he's getting in his car. And they live across the freeway. But at one point, Rondo itself was the street that ran down what is now 94, and there were houses on both sides. This wasn't something that just happened to us in St. Paul. The Federal Highway Act of 1956 reshaped the U.S. From 1957 to 1977, nearly 1 million Americans lost their homes to highway construction, and most of them were people of color. Some of the places that I mentioned, but this is not an exhaustive list: Overtown in Miami, I-95. In Detroit, you had Black Bottom and Paradise Valley being destroyed by I-375. In Montgomery, Alabama, you've got Centennial Hill, Bel Air, and the Bottoms by I-65 and I-85. So these things that are done are not done by happenstance, they're done by design. Thinking about what the stories were that were told about these particular neighborhoods and why they were worth giving up for the betterment of a highway. And who are the people sitting around the table making those decisions? And those of us who knew the beauty of our neighborhoods weren't able to be there to represent our experiences. So I'm going to pause here for a minute because what I didn't want to do is have this be a doom and gloom. We had this beautiful neighborhood, and then the freeway, it was torn down for the freeway, and then there's nothing left of it. We are literally a neighborhood split in half. As I shared earlier, I'm on one half of 94. There's parts of Rondo to the south of 94, and there's parts of Rondo still left to the north of 94. And what we do every year is we have a celebration of Rondo called Rondo Days. I want to share just a video quick for you to see some of these Rondo natives. And I'm just going to pause here.
I don't think we're getting your sound, Candace. You may need to share sound.
Right. I'm going to stop sharing really quick because I know that my time is coming to a close, but I wanted to share a few questions of kind of like the so what, now what. So I shared a bit about the neighborhood in which I grew up in and currently live. Thinking about how to make this applicable to you. Your neighborhood may not have been destroyed by a freeway, may not have been impacted by quote unquote urban renewal. But the questions that I want to leave you with to think about the rest of this evening and also tomorrow, well, not tomorrow because everybody's off work, but Tuesday, when you're with your students again, is what stories exist within your own neighborhood and community? What is the history of your hood? Who are the elders in your neighborhood that can share with you what it was like when they were children and why people chose to move there and why they chose to stay? What stories exist within the neighborhoods and communities surrounding your school, where it's located? There's a lot of history there and funds of knowledge that sometimes we don't tap into. What stories of resilience and resistance exist in those spaces? Thank you. I'm done.
Yeah, Candace, thank you so much. Really love the local stories and the ways that they kind of tie into the broader story of America and the ways that we can all see ourselves and in the ways that you've tried to better see your own community. I think that that's so powerful. Um, I just want to ask you a quick follow-up question just about kind of the personal nature of that learning journey for you. What's like is there a relationship made from this learning that you've been engaged with? Did you meet anybody kind of new or unique just because you went down this path, or engaged with a new like institution or something like that in your community?
Yes, and first I have to say, y'all, I'm sorry. This is me trying to be focused. I didn't monitor the chat. I didn't realize I was sitting here listening to the video and you couldn't hear it. So I apologize for that. I probably looked mad stupid, like smiling and like,
No,
oh,
no, it's all
they're
good.
listening to Mr. Anderson and there's no subtitles there. So I apologize. I will make sure I share that so that people can watch it if they'd like. Um, yes, I got a chance to talk. Well, one person reconnected. So my aunt Clara lives behind me. Um, we joke with people about those of us who are last name Logan, we kind of live in the compound. So I've had conversations with my aunt who is now 80 plus years old, asking her more questions about why she chose to live where she lived, right? Like I could assume it had to do with Rondo, but I got a few more insights from her. There's a coffee shop across from the Rondo Library, which was rebuilt to honor our neighborhood. And I go there sometimes for work meetings. And I happened to meet with some community members there that I told them what I was working on. I already knew them, but like hadn't talked to them about Rondo per se, and got to hear even more stories of resilience and resistance. Like one of the guys I went to school with I went to school with him. I knew his dad because he was a retired firefighter, but I didn't know that his grandfather owned a home, Reverend Davis. And he was one of the few that was like, y'all gonna have to come through me and my 12 gauge shotgun. Y'all not getting my house. And I didn't hear a lot about that. I heard about people whose houses were taken through eminent domain. And so to hear about a pastor, right, who's saying this is mine and you're not going to cross that, I got a chance to learn more about his grandfather as well as the stories that they continue to tell in their family. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's really powerful. That's great. Thanks again for being with us
Yeah.
tonight, Candace. That's an incredible story. And I'll just point to a couple of comments that ended up in the Q&A, one from Miss Faye, Barbara Dansby. Hey, Miss Faye, but just comment about the generational wealth. You talked about how the 700 homes and the, what's hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money. And then Shai talked about the ways that this also happened in New York, and you mentioned some other places around the country. So shout out to those folks in the comments. And Ashley, thank you. You're correct. It's an incredible panel of 5 educators. So thanks, folks, for engaging in the chat. I'm going to send it to Carmen, who's going to introduce us to our next speaker. Thank you.
Before I introduce Erica, Candace, thank you so much for sharing that story. I think it's such a great educator move to really invest in the spaces where we teach, right? So teaching the history of where you are currently teaching holds so much power. And just to echo what Shai said, like it immediately made me think of New York City and currently, teaching in Brooklyn. There's the Belt Parkway, which cuts right through our neighborhood. Our school is like right across the street from it, so the kids will look out the window and see and hear it. And so it's so powerful when you invest in the history of the spaces. So I wanted to echo that because I think it's great what you did. So thank you. And so now, without further ado, we have Erica Dodson, who is a former middle school teacher and has spent the last 18 years as a post-secondary school administrator. In 2010, she was the founding principal of Reynoldsburg Bell Early College Academy, which focused on providing first-generation students access to college in partnership with the Columbus State Community College. Currently, she is serving in her 7th year as principal at Ames, the Arts Impact Middle School in Columbus, Ohio. Ames takes an arts integrated approach to teaching core curriculum, and Erica has focused on developing partnerships that help to ensure students have access to and are exposed to diverse art mediums. Partnerships include local and nonprofit arts organizations such as Ballet Met, the Museum of Art, the Ohio State University Urban Arts Space, the Association of the Performing Arts, the College of Art and Design, and the Ohio State University College of Arts and Sciences. In addition, Erica serves on the Office of Engagement Dean's Advisory Committee for the College of Arts and Sciences at The Ohio State University and is a mentor principal for aspiring leaders. Training in arts integrated instruction from Focus 5 Inc. has enabled Erica to help teachers utilize arts integrated strategies to engage learners. She is a graduate of Ohio Dominican University with a bachelor's in education, Nova Southeastern University with a master's in curriculum, and The Ohio State University with a master's in administration. I introduce Erica.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's amazing how whenever each one of us speak, there's like a connection I think that we can all make. I heard Ebony talk about some tools in her classroom, and I'm hoping that she can walk away with some strategies to, I don't know, just engage her students because this work is hard work. And Candace, as you're talking, my school is located in downtown Columbus, and we have a Lincoln Bronzeville area in which they just put a freeway right in it. And so our students are actually working on a project interviewing elders from the community and taking their story, and they're going to then draw different images that they connect from that story, and we're creating a mural that will tell the, yes, Mr. Kennedy, this is something new. I know, Mr. Kennedy. So that will tell something new, but will be housed in that building, and people will come to see that. So just that connection there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully this will work. I don't know about all of you, but I have about 700 screens up and tabs. Let's see which screen. It says I'm sharing, but I don't know if you can see my presentation. Can you?
Yes, you are on your Canva. So
Okay.
arts, photography.
Great.
All
Okay.
good.
We're going to get started. And this is supposed to be interactive. So I can only see the panelists that are on here right now. But for those of you that are at home, I know we have about 40 of those that are with us. I want you to be interactive while you're at home. As mentioned in my bio, our school utilizes arts integration. So we look at teaching the core curriculum through a lot of different lenses. And one of those excuse me, is to use art to spark a discourse in social studies. You can also use this, Ebony, in your classes as you connect then with your historical fiction that you're reading. So I started out with 3 photos here on the front page, and I'll go ahead and move on. So there's going to be 2 strategies that I want you to walk away with this evening. One is See, Think, Wonder, and another one is reading art as text. And both of these are to analyze historical events. So you have the students in your classroom and you want to engage them. So before maybe you introduce that historical fiction work, before you start talking about the history of your neighborhood or an event that's currently happening, executive orders, you're going to use a photo, a piece of art, and it encourages the students to then describe and have discourse about what they're seeing and what that connection is, what that photo is making them feel. So you want to make sure, and I'm not going to read all of these to you, but you want to have open-ended questions when you talk with students, right? You don't want yes or no answer. So that's the first one. You want to start with these open-ended questions to engage the students in conversation in the classroom. So if I were to go back to the previous slide and I'm asking you, what are you seeing when you see the woman with the megaphone? What are you seeing when you're seeing Malcolm X? What do you think they are talking about? All right, you want to have those open-ended questions so that it then encourages that collaboration. You can either always, and you're all educators on here, I'm coming from the role as an administrator giving advice to teachers, but making those groups for students that they're working in, they're analyzing that artwork, they're sharing their thoughts and insight. You can connect it with current events. You can also connect it to historical events. As we are going through this time of a new president and changes that are being made on a daily basis, I think that it would be a great time to connect it to current events, these modern day issues that pardon me, that are taking place each and every day. And you want to be sure to have a diverse array of arts as well. Okay, so use different paintings, photography, sculptures. We have hundreds of years of artwork that can inspire students to have a very deep conversation. I encourage you also to do your background on what image that you're using, who took the image. Google is both a blessing and a curse at times. So let's make sure as you're preparing that lesson, as you're trying to engage students in discourse, that you're using a diversity of art. So, and I think the timer has started and I can't mute it right now. Nope, I'm going to go back. But so for the first one, for See, Think, Wonder, you want to first ask yourself what's going on in the picture. So take some time and write this down. What is it about mainly, right? These are the questions that you're asking the students. What is the artist trying to teach or communicate? And what do I notice or wonder? So take some time. Again, I can't see everyone on here. You might hear a timer in the background. Go ahead and write down those 4 questions. So as I go to the next photo, what is going on in the picture? What is it about mainly? What is the artist teaching or communicating? And what do I notice or wonder? And this is the first strategy of See, Think, Wonder. I'm going to escape for 1 second I'm going to delete this timer so you don't hear it. Oh, it didn't work. It came back. So we're going to take a minute. Here's this image. Again, this is the first strategy of See, Think, Wonder. And if you didn't already, I'm going to go back 1 slide. What's going on? What's it about mainly? What's the artist teaching or communicating? What do you notice or wonder? If anyone could drop in the chat. If you could drop something, well, it's not the chat. If you can drop it in the Q&A for me. I'm going to go back and see if I can get this to stop ticking. All right, so anyone, if you had something that you put in the Q&A, we might be seeing women in a red dress. We might be seeing women that are holding something in their hand and their arm is outstretched. We might be wondering, like, well, why are they in the rain? Why couldn't they do this inside? These are the things that your students might be saying. Now, granted, you might not use a photo from Handmaid's Tale if you know where this is coming from. You might have chosen a different photo. I just thought it would be something that most of us on this chat, maybe you've seen this show, and so you've put that out there. I'm going to, yes. So Ashley says all women, all dressed the same, various races, fist pointed inward. And so from that, you might ask your students, well, why do you think they're all dressed the same? Why would all of these women have on the same outfit? Why would all of these women have their arm raised? What do we think they're holding? Yes, they're in the rain. Well, why would you be sitting in the rain? How long have they been kneeling? So take a moment, and this again goes back to what Ebony was talking about. She's going to introduce a book. She's going to do The Watsons Go to Birmingham. Maybe she finds a piece of art or a photograph from Birmingham, Alabama, from the time that she is studying. And she posts that photo to then, going back to the chat, they all look Puritan-like, Shai said, right? So then that elicits a deeper conversation, even like, what does Puritan-like mean? What does that mean? Who can tell me what a Puritan is? Who can tell me what that word, who can give me the definition for Puritan? When I say someone is Puritan-like, you can also go even further. How many of you have ever been told that you are like a certain group of people, or you've seen a group of people and thought, wow, have you ever seen someone dressed like this? A group of individuals get together. Excuse me. So here is our next slide that I want you to use for the See, Think, Wonder. Again, hopefully you wrote those questions down. But when we put this image up on the screen, maybe in your class, you're studying the most recent election versus one from 4 years ago. And if you would, go ahead and drop your answers in the Q&A part. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? I know I see people holding flags. I see people holding American flags. I see people holding Trump flags. Mr. Kennedy says he sees a large crowd. I think they shouldn't be there. I wonder why they took this approach. You see a large crowd, and why then would we say, I think they shouldn't be there? Maybe they should be there. Shai's saying, who are they? Why are they there? I think a lot. Now, granted, we're coming into a situation in which we lived this time, but I believe Ebony spoke about 9/11. The middle schoolers I have were not alive during 9/11, right? So when we put up an image from 9/11 as we begin to discuss that time, they may not have all of the feelings. But David said a celebration of a community of believers, one might say. So someone might look at this and say, oh my gosh, it's a celebration. It's a party. It's a great time that's happening. All right. We're also seeing that the biggest flag that's hanging is a Trump flag. Thank you all for participating at home. This is what you want to have happening in your classroom. I bought all of my teachers a 2-minute like kitchen timer, right, with the sand in it. And so what you do is you put up that image, you give them 2 minutes, and all they're doing is writing down what they see, think, or wonder. Okay, for the first 2 minutes, all you're doing is writing down. There's no conversation. Once the timer runs out, you set it again, and students have 2 minutes to turn and talk to their partner. So if you were in my classroom, you would have written down, just like we were putting in the Q&A, and I'm monitoring the chat and the Q&A. Sarah had said, I wonder what the population of this crowd consists of. So who are the people in the crowd? Someone else said, I think they're standing on a historic building. And so why would you perceive that this building's historic? What do you know? What do you see around you to say that this would be historic? So again, the first 2 minutes, you're just writing. And then the second 2 minutes, you're having your students turn and talk to a partner. So this is the first strategy. And again, here's a timer for you to start thinking about how you can use this strategy within the next few weeks. You're going to go back to school. Let's say, Monday's President's Day. What can you do on Tuesday? I want you to write down an upcoming unit or lesson that you can do. I saw someone in the chat earlier talking about reading historical fiction representing the Latin community. So what lesson do you have coming up? And how can you use Google? Just search an image. And not just in social studies, but how can you use it in other content areas? Again, the timer's going, you're just writing down your thoughts. Ebony mentioned this would be a great way to introduce historical fiction unit in her class. Ebony, I am a former 8th grade English teacher, taught 8th grade English for 4 years, taught social studies in middle school for 4 years. And this was a way that I would introduce some of the novels and the genres and the eras that we were studying. Again, see, think, wonder. Every student can see the photo. Every student can see the image. And you're not making them share out in front of the class. You can with the next 2 minutes, 2 minutes on their own, 2 minutes turn and talk to a partner, and then 2 minutes and you can cold call on the groups. Suzanne Chad in the chat is talking about how she's teaching how a bill becomes a law, and she can show the picture of Strom Thurmond filibustering in the 1957 Civil Rights Bill. Sarah is mentioning it being useful in humanities. Ebony, using their voice in writing, there's so much power in that. There is. And Sarah, you had mentioned in your presentation about art, and art doesn't have to be drawing. This is art. Photography is art. In the next few slides, there are some paintings. But every student can see, think, and wonder. We all have questions. And when you're giving them that time to just write what they're seeing, thinking, and wondering, it takes that pressure off of perhaps the students that get nervous with sharing. I'm going to really try and get rid of this timer, but it keeps coming up from a previous slide. The next one we're going to focus on, and hopefully I'm not going too quick, is reading art as text. And there are 9 parts to this, reading art as text. So the facial expression, focal point, I'm not going to read all of these to you, but what I am going to do is teach you, and so you're going to have to participate from home, but I'm going to teach you how to remember them and how to get your students to remember them. All right, so the first one, this is interactive, okay? Again, I feel like I'm talking to a wall because I can't see all of you. But the first one is facial expression. So you're going to take your index finger and you're going to do a circle around your face. Facial expression. So if we go back and you'll see some artwork, when you put this up, this next strategy is going to use these eight pieces for students to read artist text. So the first one again is facial expression. The next one, focal point. You're going to take your two fingers, put them towards your eyes, and you're going to take your fingers away from your face. Focal point. Okay. Facial expression, focal point. The next one is gesture. So you're going to take your fist and you're going to swing your arm as you say the word. So we're going to do 3. Facial expression, focal point, gesture. The next one is clothing. As you can see, the kid there in his clothing. You're going to pinch both of your shoulders, your clothing, and with each syllable, you're going to let it go. Clothing. All right? Clothing. So we're going to put all 4 together. Facial expression, focal point, gesture, clothing. All right. Next is setting. We're going to draw a square with our fingers or a rectangle for the setting. When you are looking at a photo, when you're looking at art, what is that setting? So again, setting. So from the beginning, facial expression, focal point, gesture, clothing, setting. The 6th one is object. You're going to take a fist, you're going to put it in your palm, object. Again, fist, palm, object. So from the beginning, facial expression, focal point, gesture, clothing, setting, object. So when that image is up, what are the objects that we see in the image? What is the setting? What is the location? What is the time? The clothing, how are they dressed in that image? What can it tell us? Is someone doing a gesture? And what's the focal point? Where are the people in the image looking, and what is their facial expression? All right, the 7th one is quantity. What do we see? When I showed that image from January 6th, Mr. Kennedy, I believe, said there was a large group of people. So you're going to look at the quantity. And to remember that one, you're going to count to 3. Quantity, right? Quantity. So from the beginning, if you're at home, here we go. Facial expression, focal point, gesture, clothing, setting, object, quantity. The last 2 are size. So you left off here with quantity. Size, you put your palms together, you go out, right? Size, what does it look like? Maybe there's a boat in the picture, so the kids are going to focus on what size an object is. And then last, after you do size, you're going to do color, like you're a painter, you're coloring. So I don't see anything yet in the chat to tell me to slow down, but we're going to do this together. Okay, so if you're at home, we're starting from the very beginning. Index finger. Thanks for turning your camera on, Mr. Kennedy. Here we go. Facial expression, focal point, gesture, clothing, setting, drawing a square, object, quantity, size, and color. Okay, do it one more time. And you're teaching this to your students, okay? You're gonna teach this to them. Ebony, you're gonna be great. You're gonna bust out historical fiction. It's gonna be fabulous. Here we go. From the beginning, index finger, facial expression, focal point, gesture, clothing, setting, object, quantity, size, color. So that's what you're looking at. You got all of those. Okay, and I have links I can share with some of this. This is a training that I received from Focus 5, which is an arts integration company, but there's a lot of different links out there for you so I can share those with you. Now the timer might come back on again, but here. Okay, so here is our first image. We see an image. It's Jimmy Carter. You can see him. You're looking for this first time at the first four: facial expression, focal point, gesture, and clothing. The timer, because you have a minute to look at those. You can write it down or just look. All right, you can drop in the chat for those that are on the panel or the Q&A what you noticed. Breakdown here of what you noticed. All right, so I'm trying to monitor the Q&A at the same time. So a facial expression. Does anyone see a facial expression on here? How about this? Look at the baby. Look at the baby. The baby's, in my opinion, I would look at my partner or I've written down, the baby might be like, who is this guy? Someone mentioned Jimmy Carter is smiling. What is the focal point? Where are the eyes of the people in the image? What are they looking at in this photo? Someone said there's expression of distrust on the child's face. Carter's looking at the baby. There's smile, there's caring. You might see a gesture. I see Carter's hand on the back of the child. And then the last one, and Nina had mentioned the mom is looking at the baby's expression. So the child is looking at Carter like, I'm not really sure who you are. The mom is then looking at the baby's looking at Carter. Okay, so those are the first four that we just did together. Let me close out the chat. Okay, the next, here's a different picture that you can use. And you're looking at the next 5. Setting, what objects are in there, quantity, size, and color. It would tell you, excuse me, this painting is from the Great Migration. So we might think that those in the front, someone mentioned, are family members walking along. Is it during an industrial time? There's lots of people in the photo. So when you look at quantity, if you go back to the last slide, you're noticing that there are a lot of people. Maybe that is a family of 5. And the focus appears to be on the horizon. And Shai, I'll definitely get you this slideshow. I think they'll share it, but and I can give you there's like a script if you would need it also. It looks like someone's saying on the front of the train. So again, go back to those open-ended questions. Where do we think this family could be going? What is the era or the time that this painting is from? And how do you know that? What in the photo, what in the setting of this photo would give answers to the students? And the answers don't have to be right or wrong, right? The point is that we are eliciting discussion and discourse in the classroom. Sarah mentioned that their clothing could tell you about the setting. Nina mentioned that the colors, right? Color, they're not bright, they're not vibrant. All right, so moving on. Here's another one. At the top, all I did was list the 9 facial expression, focal point, gesture, clothing, setting, objects, quantity, size, and color. Please, if you would, drop anything from those 9 that you see in the Q&A. All right, you've had your minute. You may have written some things down, or you've decided not to be interactive. But here is an image. Can anyone, what's a focal point? What colors do we see? What is the setting? Nina says the focal point is away towards buildings, those that are pointing. Robbie mentioned urgency and distress in facial expressions. There are several people on the balcony pointing. The colors are muted. It's a motel, it's a hotel. There's a pointing gesture. There are a lot of folks in this photo, and I feel as though there are different races represented. I will say we are obviously online. You're only hearing me speak at the moment, but one tool that you're going to have to teach your students is how just to think for the first minute and write, right? They oftentimes want to shout out an answer. This is a great starter in your classroom just to start some discussions. And so it's a way for them just to think and write. What do they see? What do they think? What do they wonder? And how are they using these 9 tools to read this art as text? Rich wrote, there's a man bleeding on the ground, and the crimson red blood stands out. Again, what is that color? He picked up the color. So my time is coming close to an end. Here is another photo. We don't have time to go through it all. But when you are studying historical time periods, you could definitely look at the clothing. What is the setting that you know of? What objects are in this photo? And then I can't get that little clicker to stop, so it's going to stop in about 30 seconds. But I want to offer up these little cubes that are yellow. Those cubes that are yellow, I bought them all for my teachers. It's a tool that we use in English classrooms. And you can just throw out the cube. The kid catches it. It's foam. It's not going to hurt them. Okay. So you can just throw out the cube and they just have to look at it, and whatever's on the top, they're not supposed to turn it. Like if you get who, then that's what you're answering. Okay, so there's a link for that I can put in the chat. There's my contact information, and then if you want to scan the QR code, you can, and it just gives me some feedback as what I've shared with you tonight.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you for bringing us into your classroom, for having us put on the hat of a student. I really appreciated that. Also, you sharing this strategy, but like I was seeing in the Q&A, a lot of people saying, you know, I've used this in my class, but like not this way where you have these really difficult and intentional conversations. So I really appreciate you for presenting us with that. Um, let's see if there's any more questions in the chat. Rich says your choice of picks is so impactful. I would agree. I think that minute I needed it to kind of like really think. I needed you to tell me to put something in the chat because I was just still in awe of some of the photos. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you for doing this. For the sake of time, I'm going to pass it over for our next presenter.
Yes, and thanks again, Ms. Dawson. If you think that was great, you should see her around her school as a principal. She doesn't like that, okay? She doesn't like that, but and a tremendous leader. So very, very well done. All right, last but not least, okay, I want everybody to sit in the greatness of having 5 Black women presenters during Black History Month, educating the heck out of us. So I thank you to all of you. So last but not least, we have Miss Angie Thornton. Originally from Spokane, Washington, Angie works in the Seattle School District at an international high school. She holds a master's in teaching with an endorsement in social studies and language arts. Angie's first passion is teaching ethnic studies and Black studies. She's leaning into her literacy era by teaching IB language arts and literature. Angie's priority in her position is to uplift voices of young people, especially from marginalized communities. She is privileged to advise her school's Black Student Union and East African Student Association. She is also an anime enthusiast and has a deep love for live music in her downtime. So without further ado, our last presenter, Miss Thornton, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody, and good evening. You are so right, Erica. I think all of our topics really do kind of intersect at a certain point. And so what I have for us this evening is a learning experience about how to bring food into the classroom. And so let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. And I also put some notes on my PowerPoint. So let me get myself situated so I make sure I stay stay direct and stay on task for the most part here. So I'm going to call this food for thought. And what I've noticed a lot being in my setting as a secondary high school teacher is that food is really important for high schoolers, and it's really an engaging point for them. And so from the beginning of the year through the end of the year, there are ways to meaningfully discuss and incorporate food into your classroom. So I'm going to give a quick overview in just a moment. Then we will talk about kind of the why behind the importance of talking about food in the classroom and even bringing it in. And then I have 3 different strategies or lessons that you could try. And then after we're done, I have some resources that I've used and some that I think will help you either get started to think about how you could do this in your classroom. And I think this is even applicable if you are not a classroom teacher, if you are a community member, if you are like SciUp, if you are somewhere in the building that does meetings. I think all of these techniques and strategies will be helpful for you regardless. So the why, and I must kind of preface this entire presentation with that When I was in my master's program, we learned something called like a deep learning framework. So I am pretty much a full project-based teacher, and I try to incorporate that as much as I can into my practice. I also am, I think it's a privilege. I get to teach Black Studies, which is a social studies class, and I teach IB literature and language. So I have 11th grade students coming through my classroom all day long. So I get to create a humanities block, even if students don't have my class back to back. So I kind of have to preface my presentation with the fact that I'm privileged to have 2 humanities classes that I teach. I also have the benefit of having a culinary arts department in my school. And so collaborating through food is honestly really easy for me. So I do recognize that not every setting is going to have that same benefit or privilege, but I think you can still really take these lessons and use them as you need to. And I also think when talking about food, it's something that brings all of us together, and it's something that is so close to our hearts and our culture. So being able to share food helps us to share who we are and build community through that. And that is really our first strategy. So here are 3 different strategies that are entry level. And the first one is, I think it's really cool, and it's something that you would do at the very beginning of the year. It's all about crafting your own cultural placemat. And it's very low prep. All you need is 11 by 17 pieces of paper and art supplies. And what you're gonna have students do is to think about where they're from, maybe draw that on your placemat, and then a food item that connects them to their home. And then they get to draw that item out. Another step that you could take with them is to have them draw out the utensils that they use with the food item of their choice, because there is really a diversity in utensils that we use with the food that we eat, right? Sometimes we're going to eat food with our hands. Sometimes we're going to use chopsticks. Sometimes the fork, spoon, and knife make a lot of sense. But that really does help us really see where somebody comes from by looking at the different things that'll be on their food placemat. If you wanted to take this from 2D to 3D, if you are finding maybe items from your own community on your personal placemat, if you're doing an exemplar, I think bringing in a food item and having students share that is a way to let students into your culture as a teacher and kind of to let them see who you are. That's an easy way to do it. You could also offer a potluck and have students bring their placemats out and eat dishes using their placemats and having conversations about them in gallery walk styles or anything else like that. So that's a really great way at the beginning of the year to build community. You have your name on your placemat, and it's just, for me personally, I use not name tents, but sheets of paper for questions and answers, and I have their names on it. And it helps me learn students' names in about 3 days. So if you're doing something like this, I think it could really help you to learn your student on a deeper level. I also have identity spaces, which is a really great mini unit that you can start your year with. Identity spaces would ask you to take your desk and to bring in things that you identify with. So maybe bring something in that's your favorite color, bring something in that's your favorite food, an animal that represents you. So you have a list that you want students to think about that creates their own space for their identity. And another option for you to do is have them bring in a recipe. So that's the 2D option. So they have their families maybe write a recipe out with them, or maybe they're looking at cookbooks, which is a literacy. It's a really big literacy skill because you're reading math, and it's really applied reading. So maybe you're reading a recipe, maybe you're at home creating a recipe with families, or maybe you already know something that you want to bring in that doesn't have to do with any of that. It's something else that really just is who you are. So maybe it's ramen, or it's a dish that doesn't necessarily connect with your identity at home, but it's your identity that you have learned. And then we can bring that to your table setting. And again, in a gallery walk setting, that's how people start to learn about who each other are and who's in the classroom. If you are in an upper level, if you're in an upper level literacy class like I am, you definitely need a writing sample. And a great way at the beginning of the year to get a writing sample is to ask a very simple and broad prompt. And a prompt that you could do has to do with food for the soul. And so maybe you have a student write about their favorite meal, where they first had it, what it makes them feel, and a memory that comes to mind. And you take that and have them write a paragraph at the beginning of the year. So you have a writing sample from them. And that way you know where they're at and where you want them to be. So it's a good way for kind of setting some goals. I think that these 3 strategies are great and they're low prep, especially for the beginning of the year. And this is a way for, especially in high school, because I know my kids are hungry all the time, but it's just a great way to get them excited about what they're doing. And real talk, if you are providing a food item at school, those students are going to show up. And I think that in my experience, they take the lesson a lot more seriously because they know that there is this tangible item at the end of it that they get to have joy and experience. So the potluck idea and bringing it to life and making a 2D recipe that you're bringing in 3 different aspects, like actually physically bringing it in would really help to kind of deepen the community aspect of your classroom, because you're having parents involved, you're involving students and having a choice in what they're going to bring in. And you also get to see the diversity of different identities that show up in your classroom. So as you start the year, I highly recommend trying to bring food in, if not physically, at least recipes from students, so you can kind of see what brings them joy. Also, some check-in questions could be about things they eat for lunch on the weekends, what the best thing that they cooked was over the weekend, and stuff like that, because you can really get to know a student based on food, because food is really unique to our different identities and our different communities. My favorite, I think, I really do love this strategy. So I don't want to say it's my favorite because my 3rd strategy is probably my favorite. But this one is a great way to rethink discussions. I'm not going to lie. Discussions in my classroom are something that I always struggle with trying to set up and make sure that everybody is talking and that it feels meaningful. And so what I've noticed outside of doing different like snowball discussions and other strategies is that a salon is really useful for getting student ideas, and you can use a salon in so many different ways. And so what I started doing last year was getting students to understand the concept of a salon first, because salons really get their start in the Enlightenment period in Europe. And it really was just groups of people sharing revolutionary ideas. And I wanted them to know that that can happen anywhere. And so we decided to have a salon last year, and it kind of sparked I want to say this is kind of strange, like a renaissance of discussions within our social studies department, because we've collaborated with our culinary department and held probably at least 4 more salons in the last like calendar year. So mine are personally focused from A'Lelia Walker's Dark Tower in Harlem. I have this I have this really, I don't know why, I have this really deep connection to the Harlem Renaissance, even though I teach in Seattle. There are so many deep connections to the Harlem Renaissance, though, that can actually be made. Thinking about Jacob Lawrence, his migration series, half of it is at the Seattle Art Museum. Jacob Lawrence taught at UW. He actually, and when he died in Seattle. So there is a connection between Seattle and the Harlem Renaissance that I always try to bridge, because it's such an important era for students to know about. And so taking A'Lelia Walker's Dark Tower, and kind of scaling it down to a student discussion was something that was really empowering, and students absolutely loved it. So let me see if I can get this. Okay, here's an example, and I'm gonna just talk real quick about how I set it up. In my Black Studies class last year, we had a salon all about community and liberation. Just because as a school community, we are kind of at this interesting point where like students really want to feel this sense of community, but there aren't the actions that are happening to kind of bridge that gap and have them feel like this is my school. So we had a conversation about that. And what you'll see here is that this is actually a menu as if you would see it at a restaurant. We had bussers, we had an entire cafe that was serving biscuits and I think it was tea and cocoa, but you had to earn $5, which means you had to answer at least 2 questions before heading to the cafe. And that to me was really important because I wanted to engage everybody into a conversation. And who does not want biscuits for breakfast? Biscuits and handmade jam as well. So they had to discuss in their small groups. And then I had a little sheet that was an order form and it said which questions that they answered. And then I gave out little fake dollars. And then they took those fake dollars to the cafe and then were able to make purchases with the cafe, which was our culinary classes job. So it was really kind of a project. Oh my gosh, what do you call it? Project management assignment as well. So it really was a deep collaboration, but it didn't feel like too much work at all. All I had to do was come up with these discussion questions. And so if you're in the middle of a unit and you are thinking about having maybe you want to have a Socratic seminar, instead of having a Socratic seminar, why don't you have a salon? Maybe you're a social studies teacher, maybe you're a US history teacher. I have a colleague who had a salon related to the Potsdam Conference or the Yalta Conference. And so my wonderful culinary teacher found recipes for little pastries that were served at the Yalta Conference, and they ended up making them and then doing a similar strategy of having dollars, and each question you answer receives a dollar amount. You take that dollar amount with you and you are able to purchase goods from the cafe. So it's really, and students probably want more than one treat, so they end up answering many different questions. I also had students banking their money for the next salon, and unfortunately for them, we did not end up having a second salon because we ended up doing a rent party instead. So the money that they banked and all of the wonderful conversation that they had was all for learning and no sweet treats, which I honestly really appreciated because they were in it for the purpose of community. And I just love it. So they weren't even mad when they found out we weren't having another salon. I gave them their money back and they were like, oh, and they're really excited about the fact that we had done it in general. So I do really encourage you to try taking your discussion and turning it into more of a focused project. It doesn't take much more prep, if at all. And if you don't have a culinary department like I do, talk to your PTSA and maybe get some funding so you can have cookies or you can buy some little treats for them. And I strongly encourage you to have it kind of connected to the text you're reading. So for me, if I was teaching I just taught purple hibiscus recently. I might have them have a drink of, oh my goodness, I think it was some sort of a banana juice or something that the father had them sipping at the beginning of the book. But because purple hibiscus is fully about like, they're always at the table eating a food item, I would definitely want to bring in some Nigerian treats so that my students could really kind of deepen their learning about Nigerian culture through the text. But honestly, this is a really great strategy, in my opinion, for how you can kind of switch up a discussion and really encourage students to have meaningful conversation without without having it feel so bland, if you know what I mean. So this is really just kind of creating your own little cafe. And my final strategy is kind of intense. It is the large project or a culminating collaboration. This is something that I will 100% say takes many hands to effectively execute, but it is one of the best projects. And I think it connects to everything that we've been talking about today. And this one is called a rent party. So this is a project that I do. It's a school-wide project. Forgive me, I'm trying to get myself together and look at my notes so I don't forget anything. Okay. So again, this collaboration requires a lot of support. I'm not going to lie to you. I also, again, I use my Black Studies US History class, my IB Literature and Language class, and last year I used my buildings culinary class. They make a lot of food for us. And we also last year had a sophomore world history class bring in food for our rent party as a food imperialism unit. So it really does encourage a lot of collaboration within your building, but it's super cool. So many of you are probably from the East Coast, or you know about the Harlem Renaissance. And during the Harlem Renaissance, there was something called rent parties that happened. And that was because landlords would raise the rent 2 to 3 times the normal price for Black renters. And Black folks wanted to keep that community Black. So they were down to throw some parties, and they would be like maybe $1 entry fee. There'd be some food, live music, and who knows, maybe Langston Hughes would be there. But you could hang out all night long and help that family or help that community make rent for the next month. So for our school at GU South, we're not trying to pay rent. Like, my rent's not due, but we do need to help the community. So what we do is we have a community fundraiser, and we have our culinary classes make mac and cheese. Last year it was spaghetti for the whole school, and we have them kind of come through and see our ELA exhibits, which are short stories, art projects, playlists. We have live music from our jazz band, but it is just a collaboration of different departments and different students that come together and show what they've learned about the Great Migration, that show what they've learned about the Harlem Renaissance, and the fact that this is a time where Black Americans were really creating our own sense of culture. This is how we talk about the different ideas, the differing ideas, the headbutting that happens within the community as we're creating this sense of culture, right? Some people want us to show our best selves, and other people want us to be real honest about who we are, and that it's not perfect. It's not always beautiful, but it is us. So like, that's the truth, right? So that's how we're showing our learning about everything we have kind of discussed regarding the Harlem Renaissance and the Great Migration through an ELA and social studies lens. Last year, we did a diaper drive with an organization called West Side Baby. And this is from a student, they created this. So I wanted to kind of show you guys that this is a pretty student-driven project. I do have to do some of the things around planning. But they decided that we were helping West Side Baby. They all voted. We communicated with West Side Baby to figure out what they needed, and then we created our own flyer. And we had probably over 1,000 diapers donated. and lots of other supplies because we wanted students to pay rent. Obviously, it wasn't required, but we wanted them to give back to their community in order to really enjoy our spaghetti and cornbread feed. And we had a lot of adults that brought some stuff in, and we had parents that came to this event as well. It was all day. But it was also really important that students understood why we were having a spaghetti feed in the first place. And yes, spaghetti does originate in Italy, but it should be noted that A'Lelia Walker's Dark Tower served spaghetti at one of her first salons, so I wanted to honor that. And cornbread has a really interesting intersectional history, and so we wanted to teach about that as well. So students were able to access that learning as they waited in line with our student-run cafe. And I can't remember what we called our cafe, but it worked out really well. Students got service hours for working the cafe. This was done by our culinary department. They have just like a bunch of talent and creativity within those students. And so they were learning about cornbread, which we served, and spaghetti. Other students brought in dishes that were soul food for them. So I saw horchata, I saw students bringing in chicken and waffles. So they brought in dishes that connected to the Harlem Renaissance, or that was soul food for their community, because not everybody is going to connect with that Harlem Renaissance Great Migration like directly, but within my school community, I know so many people have an experience with migration. And so that is kind of an intersection that we can all kind of like a leveler of sorts. So I wanted them to bring in whatever was reflective of their communities. And yes, we are definitely using food around the world. It just depends on what the focus is. Sorry, I'm like gonna go back to a question from a little while ago. Depending on the subject of your salon, I think you should have food that connects to that. So if you're doing a Socratic seminar on a text, maybe there is a food item that was consumed in that text, or that was popular at the time the text was released, that you can bring in and have your salon kind of hosted around. Or maybe if we're talking about things that are happening in the social studies, like the social studies realm, we can talk about like just the colonization aspect and bringing in foods that have been like colonized, like banh mi. There's just so many different ways to kind of play with a salon and what food items you bring in, which is really cool. I think it's such an open-ended discussion strategy that I think will really kind of spark an interest in students. Let's see here. So yeah, so this is something we do all day. We try to raise either, well, we can't really raise funds because there is a lot of red tape with fundraising at schools. So that's why we did a diaper drive, because it's really easy to do like physical fundraisers, but monetary fundraisers, there's some red tape. So you guys got to be careful about that. But if you're gonna do a rent party, I strongly suggest having family members involved. And if you don't have a culinary department like I do, invite your students to bring a dish that will feed. I recommended that they bring a dish that has enough servings to feed their class. Even though the whole school is coming through and going to get some samples, I don't want them to have to make like 500 samples of, 500 samples of pancit, for example. No, I don't need that. Just make a class size and then we'll just start giving it out to whoever. And once it's done, it's done. But it really does help a lot with students from different grade levels learning about different topics. And I've got students that are in 11th grade now that were freshmen for our first rent party. And so they're very excited to put on our third annual rent party. And I'm really excited to see what they come up with too, and who we have our fundraiser for, and who we're paying rent to this year. So I think that is almost it. I have one more thing. Resources. So if you are a little bit new to the concept of food in the classroom, I highly recommend the book High on the Hog. That's the photo. It's by Jessica B. Harris, and it is a phenomenal, it's literally a journey from Africa to America. High in the Hog, the Netflix series, has 2 seasons. The first season is enslavement through the Civil War. And then the second season takes us from we're starting in New Orleans, I think. And then the second episode is on the Harlem Renaissance. And they're cooking all of these wonderful dishes. And there's so much food history. Students love these shows, they love them. If you want to host a salon, I have Salon Hosting 101. It has a bunch of different ideas for how you can do it. Also, remember, salons happened in the community, so you don't have to have this in the classroom. This can be something that you can host next week with your friends, and you can start having these ideas about how you're going to mobilize, right? Because we're in this time where we got to start doing something if we haven't. So have a salon and get your friends together and figure out where are we going to go canvas? What are we going to go do? Another thing is connecting students to the world through food. This one is where I got the 11x7 placemat. And then deep learning, it's a teaching method that that's what I learned in my teaching program. So I just wanted to give that to you guys if you want to start getting yourself to project-based learning. But that is all.
All right, Ms. Thornton, thank you. Thank you so much. I really didn't think about food that way in the classroom to be that involved. Like that is a very it seems very simple but very intricate process. So I thank you for sharing. You got a lot of feedback in the chat, so make sure you definitely send that to the panel. Okay, again, just basking in the ambiance of greatness that we had. Thank you all for presenting. I want to pass it to David. David is here, right? He's going to share a few things. And then we are going to bombard you in the chat with some links for upcoming events. We have an upcoming event on Tuesday, and then multiple events throughout the month of February and well into March. So I will turn it over to you.
Let's see here. Hey, everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right. All right. Well, I just couldn't not come in because I'm too fired up watching you all. I've been at a family event and I'm going to step back to it. But I started listening. I thought I was going to check in, going to listen for a minute or something. And Candace was in the middle of rondo. And, I just couldn't disappear. So I've been listening the whole time. And I just wanted to come in and say thank you. All right. This body of work, the Sunday teaching, which we do a couple times a year, is both educationally valuable, but is also, I believe, you can pick a word for it, but spiritually / philosophically / pedagogically valuable for us in all kinds of ways. I've been thinking about you all, the cohort that is presented today, and I went back and I looked. Candace, you came in October 2022 on our first trip, and I'm looking across chronologically. Angie, you came in February 2023, all right? And Ebony, you came in February 2024 with us, and Erica and Sarah, you came in September of 2024. All right. We've had 160 educators across 5 trips. And in this particular instance, we've got Minnesota, 2 from Columbus, 1 from Edmonton, and 1 from Seattle representing. And so that's half of the place I've lived, by the way. And so I'm just really grateful and appreciative of you all and what you're doing. I want to tell you one thing that we've been thinking about at Common Power. Actually, I want to tell you about an event that's coming up that we just announced or just decided on yesterday that you'll also promote on Tuesday at the upcoming event. But I'm going to end with the event. What we've been thinking about at Common Power is why we knock doors for our political work. Now, Common Power is a family of organizations, and the Institute for Common Power is our C3 educational arm. But many folks who are part of our educational arm also decide they want to volunteer and go do work with us. And that volunteering usually is knocking on doors and sharing pieces of information and education with voters about upcoming elections. often in partnership, almost always in partnership with organizations on the ground in the communities. And we know that we knock doors for the very logical reason that it matters in terms of winning elections. Okay, that is like the presenting issue, to use kind of therapy terms. That's the presenting issue here, is that we go out to knock doors to in our political arm to fundamentally win elections. But what we now know, and we believe like is really the sustaining element, the core of us, is we knock doors now for a much deeper transcendent reason than that. We knock doors now because it is the way that we affirm democracy in the way that we think it should work. All right, that we should talk to people, that we should be able to knock on a door and leave, just at least minimum, leave some information for people, that we should be encouraging people to vote, that it is not transactional. It is not just by votes and voters. It is about the nature of what is democracy, that it is a human to human relationship. And so even in the darkest moments for this country, and we're in one of them right now, it is the fundamental act of being small d democratic that is life sustaining. It is. So each of you talk about this and each of you live it out in your classrooms and in your work. And that fundamental affirmation of democracy on a daily basis is what Common Power is committed to. Ups and downs, sideways, left and rights, tough and great moments. The reality is that we are here to affirm this human dimension of democracy. And I think about that in relation to what you all do as educators. What's the presenting reason you're educators? It's to teach, to educate people, to be more knowledgeable about the world, to understand and to be thoughtful humans. That's the presenting reason why like you became a teacher or an educator. But the much deeper existential fundamental reality of being a teacher every day is that you affirm that education as a life goal is a essential thing of what it means to be human. All right, that there is a dimension of how we go through life in which we choose on a daily basis whether we're going to be curious or to learn more or to care about someone who looks like me or doesn't look like me. All right. And so you are affirming on a daily basis this core democratic function known as education. And that piece, Educators for Democracy, is the name of this body of work. Educators for Democracy, to teach, yes, but also to affirm democracy. And and that's what I feel when I came in tonight. I was learning from you all. Yeah, and I'm super curious. I think food in the classroom is spectacular. I love having fiction as a point of teaching. You can get deeper truths out of fiction than you can get out of like nonfiction, although I only read nonfiction. Just know, Ebony, sorry. I only read nonfiction. This right here is a card, a painting of a card my wife gave me for Valentine's Day. Aren't I lucky? But she wrote on here all these names of books, and they're like funny books that she would never read. Things like Reconstruction, okay, and depressing history. And these are the things that I like to read because I read nonfiction. But every time I go and read a fictional piece that weaves together historical truths, my God, that is very, very powerful stuff. And I certainly have seen students engage with that content in a safer, more robust way because they're like, they keep it a little bit at a separation from them. And all the things that you've talked about, each one of you. So thank you. I get this jolt, this adrenaline of democracy that is much beyond the thing I learned from you all. So on behalf of Common Power and the Institute, which I'm honored, of course, to be part of, I just really appreciate all that you're doing and the way you're committed to it and the way that you remain strong and committed to it in the toughest days, in the toughest moments. I want to share with you a flyer for an event we just decided we're going to do. And it's for the upcoming Jubilee celebration in Selma, Alabama. And all of you have been to Selma with us. Where'd it go?
It's in the chat, David. It's in the chat.
Oh, is it, Luke? All right.
Yeah, folks can open that image there as the flyer.
Okay. But I love the image. Just a second. I got to get the image open, man. Devin Geary put this together, and once you get a great flyer, you just want to show it. All right. There we go. Oh, see, you beat me to it. Or if somehow I got it in there magically, I'm just going to claim it. Okay. So the reality is that this is our upcoming Marching from Selma, 3 days of events live from Selma on Zoom. We're going to be doing it in person for people that are there too, but we're going to be doing it live on Zoom. And it's going to be on March 7th, which of course is the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. It's going to be on Friday, March 7th. And we're likely going to premiere a national documentary that night that features Mr. Charles Malden and Charles Douglas, our executive director. We're likely going to premiere that live Friday night from Selma. We're going to do a bunch of things on Saturday with different media folks and historical folks and some of our educators who might be in town for that weekend. And then on Sunday, we're going to be doing a broadcast live from the rooftop that will be overlooking the commemorative march. All right. It's going to be just remembering it. We're going to be joined by Dr. Harry Edwards and some other folks as part of this. We just decided to do it yesterday. And so we're going to start promoting it, but you're the first to kind of get the word of this. I don't know if there's a way in your professional communities that you could drive folks to this for extra credit for classes, or in your church communities, have people come to these or to come to this or whatever, but it's a chance to feel connected to a world-changing moment in democracy. And so we'd love to have you come and join us. And I'll be one of the folks, Dr. Terry Scott and myself will be hosting this over the course of that weekend. So love to have you. Love you all. I'm just going to hang around as you close up, but really, really, here, let's see. Can you just really, really appreciate you all. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, David. Thanks for jumping on. And I know we're late for the East Coast folks, especially, so we're going to sign off, but not before another thank you to our panelists who were incredible. Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate all of the knowledge that you have and continue to share with us and with our community. It was a great evening, and we really appreciate being with all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
All right. And this was recorded, so folks will be able to see it. We'll send out a follow-up email with this and some of the resources that were shared this evening. Thanks, everyone.